which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Clerk Cody, roll call, please.
Supervisor Gunning?
Here.
Trustee Hauk?
Here.
Trustee Micus?
Here.
Trustee Lannon?
Here.
Trustee Worley?
Here.
Clerk Cody here. Treasurer Rice is excused. Can you hear me?
All right. That brings us to item 4 on our agenda, which is approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Support that.
Motion and support. Discussion? Seeing none, all in approval of the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries.
What was this? Wasn't this an add-on?
Oh,
Oh, what's my add-on?
where's it?
Right here. This.
Oh, I laid my stuff right now.
Yeah.
Okay, we do have a request from management to put an add-on on the agenda.
Lisa, I'd accept your revision to your motion.
Okay, I'll make that revision.
Okay, so we do have a revision to add, and this would be item E on the new business, and this would be approval of a land division. So we will get to that. So we do have a revision in the motion and a second. So all in favor of the revision or the updating of the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, so now we move on to item 5, which is going to be a presentation, and this is pump station number 7, service area study, and this report is by Gordy Frazier.
Yeah, and just as Jennifer and Kim are coming up, this is a report out of a study that was approved by the Board of Trustees in May of, earlier this year, May of 2013, to evaluate the operation and the equipment and infrastructure of the pump station 7 and 8, which services an area kind of north and east of here, I guess, and to try to take a look at, what, if any, impact the pump stations had on the residents' basements as it related to the flood of 2017. So the board approved this study back in May and doing the work, and then tonight we have the report out.
All right. Come forward.
Before Jennifer gets started with her presentation, I'll just kind of briefly go over. So in June 22nd, 23rd of 2017, our area received 7.29 inches of rain within 24 hours. This was categorized as a 100-year flood event and declared an emergency by the county, state, and federal governments. One of the hardest hit areas in the township was that received a lot of property damage to individual homes was the Mission Creek Drain area. The Union Township provides sanitary sewer in that area. The service is provided, as Mark referenced, via 2 pump stations as well as the sewer collection system and manholes. In response to the homeowners' concerns in this area regarding the damage to their homes, and then the township's board's wish to be proactive in taking a look at our sewer system and how the flood or the sewer system may have affected the damages that were caused to their home if there was an effect. On June 20th, we had a presentation at the Commission on Aging to discuss the focus of the study as well as collect information from residents in the area that we didn't already have. And we sent out 199 invitations to this presentation, and we'd like to thank tonight, some of them are here in the audience tonight, the 14 residents that showed up for the presentation and provided us some information. We had some good feedback from those residents, and it was helpful to us. So, and we did send invitations for tonight's meetings to any of those residents that signed in that night. Not everybody signed in, but we did do a count. There was 14, but we did send out invitations to those people that signed in, so we knew their names and their addresses. The study was completed by Gordy Frazier, which is the township's professional engineering firm, and tonight Jennifer Hodges is here to do the presentation on their findings. So we're gonna.
Well, thank you for that intro, Kim, and thank you for allowing us the ability to do an in-depth analysis of the system. I guess in your packet is our final report. It has been fully vetted through the township manager and DPW director, and so that's what's in your packet is the final version. I also have sitting at each one of your desks a final version of it, bound copy too. In addition, a printout of the PowerPoint presentation, and there are copies sitting over here for the audience as well, if they want to take notes and take it home and share with their neighbors. But so I guess to get into the nuts and the bolts, I don't need to do an introduction, but so how do I? Oh, just okay. Thank you. Yep. What you have here, this is just a general overview of the system itself. As you all are aware, Union Township provides operations and maintenance for a sewer system, the entire sewer system that serves 5,500 customers, which is comprised of pump stations, collection, distribution, and then a 2.4 million gallon wastewater treatment plant. And of interest was McDonald-Lincoln area that was hardest hit. And this just presents a synopsis of the overall service area. And the yellow is indicative of the 8-inch gravity sewer main, and there's 12,000 linear feet of 8-inch sewer within the service area. The two red dots that you see on the map are represent pump station number 8, which is on Scully Drive and serves 10 customers, and that's a submersible pump station. And then the one to your right, further downstream, is pump station number 7, which includes pump station number 8, and then all the collection 8-inch piping that discharges into it, and that serves just under 200 customers. And then from there is a 6-inch sanitary force main, and that's the red dashed line that you see headed to the south, and then subsequently that goes on to the wastewater plant. And that force main is shared, it's pressurized force main is also shared with pump station number 14, which serves Remus Road area, which is south of that area. So that just kind of provides you, and then the two images you see are respective of the two pump stations. This infrastructure, to keep in mind too, it's 40 years old. It was built in the 1980s. And to go along with this, and what we, as going through the report, and hopefully some of you have had opportunity to look at it, and, but what we identified in the beginning of the report was just an introduction of the system, and then identified some of the previous reports that the township has done, which includes an I&I study, which did include this area at the time. I&I meaning it was a flow monitoring study to evaluate what the system flows were, and we selected different areas within the region, and that was to help us identify for sizing of the wastewater plant that was upgraded back in 2007. In addition to that study, the township's been heavily engaged in an asset management program, which is a requirement under their NPDS permit, which requires them to go through and do a detailed inventory of their infrastructure, assess the infrastructure, come up with a capital improvement plan. So some of those items were also addressed, just general scope for the system itself. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to interject. This slideshow just basically presents an overview of what we investigated, the methods that we implemented. We took a very, very in-depth analysis of the system to review. We looked at the assets, we did field visits, we went through all the record drawings, we identified the condition, we went through and did flow monitoring, we did an inflow and infiltration study, hydraulic model, and we'll get into more detail further into the presentation. But this just kind of identifies what we were looking at, the condition, the operations, and to see what impact, if any, from the rainfall event that this infrastructure may have had. Again, the whole pretense of the study was this area here in particular was had the most complaints and hardest hit, and with the flooding and the rain event that we call the event June 2017 that occurred. And this illustration just presents again the outlier of how the rain, you know, the last significant rain event of this size that we had happen in this area was in 1986. It was, you know, a 100-year rain event, and significant flooding was observed, not only by township staff, residents. Collectively, the township itself received 6 complaints specific to this area, that individuals that had come into the office, and a pretense of why we investigated this area. To start, and the first part of our study that we did, we went through and did a inventory and condition assessment of all the assets. The assets being the collection system, which is the gravity sewer, and then the 2 pump stations. And what we ended up doing, we inventoried, we collected a lot of data from the DPW staff, inventorying all the alarms, maintenance records, service calls, repairs, and alarming, run times, anything related that that would involve for work to the equipment over the last 5 years. We collected all that data so that we could establish a trend and create a history. In addition to that, Township itself has been going through the exercise and completed a complete televising and inspection of all their gravity sewers with the entire system. And so we had access to all of that information. This entire collection area itself had been televised and cleaned over in 2014, 2015. So we had all those videos, went through them, and they retained a contractor to do that by the name of Plumbers, who basically provided these videos. They provided a condition assessment for all the sewer, and a hierarchy of numbers, helped and identified areas where corrective measures needed to be implemented. They identified where any existing cracks were, deformations, and from that then the township actually, the major areas went through and actually corrected those areas. So we had inventory of that. So we created very detailed spreadsheets to inventory each assessment or each asset, then also a maintenance log, alarming, run times. So we had access to all of that information. So we were able to then, from that point, go in and do a comparison of what the township had been doing, how the stations and gravity system had been operating, and compare it to industry and DEQ regulatory guidelines, because that's what everything is designed around, is DEQ and guidelines. For example, there are guidelines as far as pump run time, as you can see. Like this little chart here indicates, for example, run time. The DEQ has a minimum 2-minute run time guideline for how long pump stations are to operate, which correlates to about 0.2 hours per day. So from the data that we had collected over 5 years, which did include the June 2017 rain event, we were able to see historically how long the stations typically ran for in comparison to DEQ guideline, and then how long it actually ran and what it was doing during that rain event, for example. And what we were seeing, typically, throughout the 5-year period, it was under the DEQ guidelines of the 0.2 hours per day. However, during the rain event and during that week, it was actually running 18 times that amount. The same was true for Pump Station 8. It was running on average 8 times higher than the DEQ regulatory guidelines. So we saw that, and that was documented. In addition, we took a look at alarms, because both of those stations have alarms that are monitored through the SCADA system and transmitted. When an alarm is acknowledged, it sends out a notice to the operator so they can go out and see what's going on. And those alarms consist of a high water alarm, low water alarm, pump fail alarm, power fail alarm, and a general fault alarm. Pump station 7, which is, and when I say 7, that's the large one that serves the entire area, just to clarify. I've looked at this forever, so. Anyway, there was no alarms acknowledged at all during that entire June 27th rain event. Obviously, there were other alarms during the 5-year period, but nothing specific to that June 2017 rain event. So, which I say that because that's important to note, because again, going back to the alarms, for example, a high water alarm, and if you're interested, I provided more clarification, I believe on page 19 of the report, that talks about what each alarm means. And a high water alarm, when that goes off, that basically is saying, because each of these stations are equipped with 2 pumps. So one pump typically runs, they alternate. And then when it hits a certain float, which tells another pump to kick on, because there's continuing to be sewage that enters the station, that's typically the hierarchy of what happens. Well, a high water alarm means that either both pumps aren't running, there's a clog in the system, or there's some, there's some type of blockage, there's, something going on, and we never had any of that was acknowledged at all for Pump Station 7. So that was very important for us to see that, because typically during a major flooding event, when the station is not able to keep up or it's having problems, you would always see a high water alarm. So that was very important that we noted that. For Pump Station 8, which serves the 10 users on Scully, there was some general alarms that are 3 to be specific that were acknowledged during that period. That station being so small just has a general alarm. It doesn't have more detailed alarms like Station 7, so we weren't able to further deduce what that alarm meant. It could have been it could have been a high water, it could have been a power fail. So that was noted in the report. And then as far as the collection system itself, as you can see, and from the televising that was done and the repairs that were done, 90% of the system is watertight as much as it's going to be, and in very good condition and consistent with design guidelines. And as far as operations and conditions for the pump station, the same was true to be found. As far as the typical run times, the operations, the alarms, and the function of the stations outside of that June 2017 rain event, consistently operated within DEQ guidelines and industry standard, is what we found. The next step, what we did, because we only at the time had access to run times, which is, it's a correlation to what the pump's rated at, so we can somewhat estimate what the pumps are pumping based on run times, but it's not accurate. So what we had proposed with our study to do is actually do true flow monitoring, which is reflective of what's actually coming into these stations. And it helps provide us, it's real-time flow monitoring, so it's instantaneous, it's recording every 15 minutes. And what Gordy Fraser staff did is, and working with DPW staff, is we actually installed 2 flow meters into 2 manholes, one at the location of McDonald and Lincoln, and then one just upstream of the main pump station number 7, so that we could actually have true accurate flow data to see what was going on. It helps provide us flow monitoring during both wet and dry weather. We installed the meter in April and then pulled it in the end of June, so that provided us a good window of springtime so that we could actually see when there wasn't rain what the flow was, and when it was raining, were we seeing an increase in flow. And from that we were able to create graphs and even break it down to day by day, so you can just see continual diurnal trends, and you can see when people are flushing their toilets, flushing their showers, and then we can definitely see impact to rain events. So with that one, with the flow metering study, we had, like I had said before, we had conducted the same flow study back in 2006 in the same area. So what this chart is here is basically, it's presenting to you what the average and the peak hour flows were that were monitored during that time period, or from April to June of this year. And then I also provided a comparison so you could see what we had measured back in 2009. And they are quite close. Obviously, there are some variations, but nothing that was actually that significant. If anything, we did see kind of a decrease in usage, and a lot of it, which we're starting to see more of, is attributed to people installing lower flow devices, toilets, faucets, things like that. So actually we did see some reduction. But I thought that was important to share. With this flow data, again, we did the same thing where we were able to, it's important to extract this so that because DEQ again has regulatory guidelines that we compare this flow data to. And DEQ guidelines have typically 100 gallons per day per person, which equates to, on average, 250 gallons per day per household, which you can see from 2018, we're under that guideline. And then for a peak flow, for that same household, it's 1,000 gallons per day per household. And we're seeing, on average from our flow monitoring, we were under those regulatory guidelines too. So it helps us to see where we're at, make sure that the sewer is designed within the DEQ guidelines, and also ensure that you continue to have adequate capacity in your sewer trunk line. So we didn't see any issues as far as the flow monitoring was concerned, and definitely have more than adequate capacity. We're running anywhere between 25 to 40% of our available capacity in that sewer system based on that flow monitoring period.
Quick question.
Yes, sir.
When you say DEQ guidelines, Are you saying, meaning it's a guideline or it's an actual standard or requirement that has some teeth involved too, that you
How it
shall not exceed or?
Correct.
reduce?
When I say guide, and I love, the DEQ does this too, they call it 10 state standards, and they call them guidelines, but they are requirements they hold you to design around. You design around specifically for new systems. If you don't have any existing flow data for communities, you have to use those guidelines. But for Union Township, because we do have flow monitoring data, they do allow us a liberty to utilize that flow data instead. But, no, correct. As far as for basis of design, when you're sizing and designing and building new sewer systems, you would use those guidelines.
Thanks.
So the next step after the flow monitoring, the flow monitoring was also important because it allowed us to further evaluate the flow data that we had. I was talking about the diurnal curves that we had and seeing from the day-to-day, and it helps us to look to see and further evaluate inflow and infiltration, because that's really the whole pretense of this study per se, is not only did we cause impact or potential impact to the system, but is the sewer system susceptible to infiltration and inflow from flooding events. So I guess it's a good thing to note, for the majority of the sewer system in Union Township, a lot of it's within the 100-year floodplain. When you pull out the FEMA maps, you look at it, we're naturally in a floodplain. And I say that because gravity sewer systems are not they're not a watertight pressurized system. They need access to air so that it can compress it, flow, and allow it to move by gravity. So unfortunately, we don't have the liberty to seal off our manholes and different things. So naturally, there is a susceptibility to storm infiltration from stormwater. And keeping that in mind, how the DEQ, again, has guidelines as to, so you can gauge a system to see whether it's considered excessive or not excessive. And that's what I've noted at the bottom here is the DEQ, as far as they're concerned, understand that you have a system, because it is open to atmosphere, has potential for stormwater to get in. So what they look at is are you seeing greater than 270 gallons per capita, which would be per household? And recalling back to the previous slide where you were at and looking at the flows, you had about 180 gallons per day per household. So that's just another tool that we were gauging against to see, is inflow and infiltration excessive? And so comparing it to, not only comparing it to that, but taking it the next step further, and I'll come back to this slide. What we did, and here's an example of those diurnal curves that I was referencing. So you can see the blue line that's jagged, that's indicative of your flow, whereas the red columns is every time there was a rain event that occurred at the time when we were flow monitoring. And what's important to look at is you can distinguish between what type of inflow or infiltration you're having based on its response time. Meaning, depending on how steep your spike is, because obviously it rained here and we had a response. So it was definitely acknowledged that something was coming into this, there was stormwater of some magnitude coming in, and then depending on how long it takes for that to recede and how long for it to acknowledge helps us to indicate is that inflow or infiltration. And I say that because going back to the previous slide, I think is the definitions and the distinctions between the different types. And groundwater infiltration is pretty self-explanatory. When you're in areas that have high groundwater and you have cracks and joints, that's how it gets in. And so you're gonna see a more gradual response time if it's attributed to groundwater infiltration. And typically you'll see those events occurring when it's spring thaw is pretty common and prevalent. And then you've got rainfall induced, which is similar, where it's coming in through your sewer pipes, your sewer leads, cracks, and any defects that you have. But you're gonna typically have a more drastic, when it rains, you're gonna see a spike. And it's gonna be a very prevalent and recognized spike like we saw on the previous slide. And then the third one is inflow. And that one's more, when you have, connections to stormwater, you have connections to footing drains, you know, you have some of those connections, cause even though we recognize that sanitary sewer and storm sewer are not connected, it does happen. It may be where it's not recognized, or they could be through homes, businesses, and through illegal connections. And so this illustration here just represents some of the means that you can have, connections from a dwelling into your sanitary sewer. And it happens. You could have it through a footing drain, you could have it through a roof drain, you could have it through a sump. There's a lot of different mechanisms that, people will do that, and, they are trying to, they may have a basement service. A lot of times we see it where it's older homes and they weren't disconnected, so, and that's where the presence of an inflow will present itself, and that's an even more spike, substantial spike. And going back to this chart where you can definitely see you've got a huge rain event coming in, and if you have a connection in that magnitude, it's gonna spike and then it's gonna immediately recede. So those were some of the measures that we went through to determine the extent of what type of inflow and infiltration we had, and then again, we went back and compared it to DEQ industry standards to see, yes, we have a response. This area specifically, this is for the, monitoring location at Lincoln and, McDonald. And then there's, in your, report, there's another one for the other location right there at the pump station, where we flow monitored. In both areas, we did see a presence of, inflow and infiltration. The location at Lincoln and McDonald, based on looking at the graphs and breaking down the day-to-day every time it rained and looking at the response, a lot of that area appeared to be more related to groundwater infiltration, which, looking through the record drawings and the soil borings reports, the water table's high in that area where the pipe's at. And then for the other monitoring location right next to the pump station, that one looked a lot more to be, because of the significant spike and immediately receding away as soon as the rain event dissipated, that one was more attributed to inflow, which leads us to believe that is a lot more related to footing drains, roof drain connections. So, and I went into more detail in the report in that to just kind of distinguish between the two. But overall, in comparison to DEQ industry guidelines and what the DEQ considers it to be excessive, you were well below that threshold. Again, going back, DEQ considers that if you're 275 gallons per day per house is excessive, you guys were averaging 180 at both monitoring locations. So, yes, we had acknowledgement of stormwater, but I don't know a sewer system that does it. Because again, keeping in mind this isn't a watertight system, we have to have access to air. And so I don't know if anybody had any questions about that. And then the final phase, what we did, taking all the flow monitoring data that we had, what Gordy Fraser has and continues to use for Union Township, we have a sewer CAD hydraulic model. And it's a great tool to allow, we use it, it's similar to the water CAD model tool that we use for the water system, but it helps us to basically continue to evaluate capacity of the sewer system, how pump stations operate together. New development wants to come in, we can throw a value in there and see what, you know, how the sewer is able to handle that flow. We took, for this specific area, we isolated it, we added all the record drawings, all the asset inventory that we had collected as far as the pump stations, the operating points for the pump stations, everything that we had collected. We input all of the actual flow data and was able to create a real-time instantaneous running model of this system so that we could evaluate it under different scenarios. We evaluated under average day scenario, we evaluated under max day, peak hours scenario, and it even included a 25-year storm event scenario. And I meant, because going through that model, we were able to, you know, see how all the infrastructure can operate together, because we do know we've got 2 pump stations running, and we also have a pump station to the south end of town that ties into that force main. So looking at all of those flow scenarios, how the 3 stations ran together, perhaps that was causing a problem. And then the same too, the DEQ has guidelines again as far as for storm events, that not only do they address I&I issues, but looking at, they do anticipate that you do have to have the ability to take on some storm. And storm being of the magnitude, you have to handle your peak hour flows, which is your normal sewage, but then also a 25-year storm event, which equates to about 4 inches in a 24-hour day. Because again, they recognize that it's going to happen. So we took the peak hour flows that we had from the flow monitoring and then factored in that 25-year storm event to see how the sewer handled capacity-wise, how the pump stations handled it capacity-wise, and how the three could run together. And it ran very favorably. There's just kind of a little illustration here that shows you the profile. The white is the pipe you can see, and the blue is basically, it's not water, that's supposed to be sewage. But you can see there's a white space there. And then the columns you see, those are manholes. So the goal is when you're running different simulations, for example, just a standard peak hour during a dry event when there's no rain, your sewer main's not, it's supposed to handle it and have full capacity. It's not supposed to surcharge. If you were having surcharging, that solid, there would be no white. It would be full blue and then moving up the manholes. You'd see blue moving up. And so that's, you know, surcharging is the sewage was backing up. And so under peak hour, we were running at 25% capacity of our pipes, and all three stations ran smoothly together with each other. And then when we factored in that extra 4 inches of rain, plus the peak hour, again, and that's what this illustration represents, we had no surcharging, because that's the goal. Is you don't want to have any surcharging in your lines. And again, we still have white showings, and we were running at about 40% capacity of our pipelines, and the same with the pumps. So that was the next measure that we ran through, again comparing it to standard practice and DEQ guidelines to see how it would handle during both dry and wet weather.
Jennifer, just taking a half a step back, just you had mentioned our alarming through the SCADA system and Pump 8 being a relatively unsophisticated single general alarm situation. And then you had mentioned Pump 7 with a more sophisticated alarm system. And you said there'd be an alarm for no power, high water, low flow, and some other alarms you had mentioned. But there is no question that our alarming system was functional and working at the time of the event in Pump 7, correct?
Correct, because that itself is an alarm too, where if you're having I think it's called a comm fail, isn't it? A communication fail. That would tell you that your SCADA system's not working. That's another alarm.
Okay, so alarms were absolutely up and running.
Correct.
Thanks.
That's a great question, though. So finally, basically pulling this all together, and I guess the best way we can put it is your report card. Just to summarize everything, and just kind of going through and identifying all the measures that we gauged it against. And the DEQ does provide a very nice platform for us to follow in any of these capacities. But Pump Station 7, yes, and 8, and the collection system itself, yes, is 40 years old. As you'll see in the report, the DPW's done a very good job of replacing pumps, motors, components as they age, and continuing to ensure that it continues to operate within industry and DEQ guidelines. So from an operations and asset assessment, there was no deficiencies noted. The same for flow monitoring, all the sewer use that we were finding, whether it was wet or dry. When I say wet, I mean a storm event. We had adequate capacity, and everything was functioning, again, compliant with DEQ guidelines that they provide us. As far as inflow and infiltration, yes, we did see response to rain events, but nothing that was considered excessive or of any concern for any normal system that we provide monitoring for. And the hydraulic analysis, the same thing. The storm sewer, or the sanitary sewer itself, has ample capacity to handle your normal sewage flows plus 25-year storm event. We didn't have any capacity deficiencies, and it did appear from the hydraulic analysis that it had capacity to take on more stormwater. But to do some housekeeping, I mean, there's always recommendations that you can continue to do to improve. And so that's basically the premise that we had at the end. Obviously, we're gonna continue to advocate for the township to continue implementing their inspection, their maintenance program that they've been doing. There's other measures that you can continue to do to waterproof your system. Again, you can't seal it off, but you can waterproof the manholes more. They have these rapid seals that you can put around the outsides of them. Again, keeping in mind that a lot of this infrastructure is within a floodplain. If there's areas that are more susceptible, there's potential you could raise those manholes more so, but then they can become obstructions, plowing hazards. So those were some ideas that we had thrown out if you're continuing to have, if there's concerns with specific manholes that can be flooded, that are flooding, to waterproof those. And then the other biggest thing that we could recommend is if there are specific pockets and areas of concern, to go through and actually further investigate as far as footing drains and illegal connections are concerned. It does appear to be that, based on the televising of the sewer system that we saw, the condition of everything, that may be the biggest culprit, just based on the flow monitoring we did, the responses that we saw from the curves, and again, just the condition of the sewer system itself, that there was very minimal defects, cracks for stormwater to get in. That's another very viable option, as to if there are specific areas, along Lincoln or O'Connor, to go in and actually investigate to see if footing drains even exist. You can do that. There's means through smoke or dye testing. Typically, dye testing is more effective. Smoke can prove challenging because of P-traps, and it just catches it in the house. And then the final, what we did was we just provided some budget pricing for those items.
So Jennifer, when we go through and do our televised monitoring in our system, which we always take a section of the system, that does not pick up any sort of non-acceptable connections into the system?
It can, if it's tied into the main. Sometimes they're tied into the leads, which we don't go up the leads, and that's where the problem is.
All right, thanks.
And that's what that previous, it's better zoomed in the report itself, but that illustration kind of shows where some of those connections are, which are outside the jurisdiction of the township, which the jurisdiction, I should say, for leads is to the right-of-way or easement line. That's as far as you have control to go in for ownership and operations. So a lot of times, correct, yeah, they can tie into the lead part, which is outside your control.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So some things as far as some capital improvements that we have, the waterproofing for the manholes. If there are specific areas in the sewer main, to go in and reline some of those areas, there's some budget numbers. The cost to do dye testing per home is in there. And then some additional upgrades that we had. This is specific to pump station 8, to add some additional SCADA alarms. And just to add flow meter installation. Neither of these stations have flow meters in them. We have, like I said, hour meters, and run time, so we can compute it. I tried really hard to find things. We did a very, very in-depth analysis, and found everything to be in very good, well-working order. Yes, sir.
Jennifer, in regards to pump 8 being upstream from pump 7, is that, and it's picking up 10 residents, I believe you said, is that really kind of the end of the dead end or the beginning of that part of the system? There's nothing upstream from
There's nothing
pump
upstream.
8?
Mm-mm. Well, I mean, there's the gravity that serves those 10 homes that dump into that station.
Okay, but beyond those 10 homes?
Correct,
There's nothing
No.
upstream from that.
But it ends at the dead end, right?
yes.
Ends or begins, that's what
Yeah,
I'm trying
yeah.
to figure out.
I know.
Begins, yeah.
Thanks.
So if you did dye testing, you would have to go into like individual homes, put dye in a sub pump, and then
You would,
sub pump
right,
or downspouts?
correct.
Okay,
And the challenge with that is that obviously requires approval to
the
access
home,
private
right.
property. You know, and that, yes, it can be challenging. And,
right,
you know, there's definitely areas that are warranted. Union Township's had other areas that have had a very prevalent illegal connections and went through that exercise. With this study, there wasn't, again, anything that was considered excessive by any means to warrant. So that's why our suggestion, if anything, if there is pockets of areas of concern, that it would be beneficial even perhaps from a homeowner standpoint to do that additional investigation, because they're at risk.
Right.
Because if the sewer backs up, there's potential for it to back up into their home. So
Right, and
there's a benefit on the homeowner's end to actually do that if there's concern that those they have that type of connection. And I guess that's why it's noted in the report.
well, then some of those homeowners might be unaware that it
Exactly,
had,
exactly.
that they had that.
Right. And that's what was a lot of the discussion during the community meeting that we had on June 20th, was talking about that and what, you know, what resources are available to them.
Sure.
You know, as you know, Jennifer, this was a devastating event for many people in Isabella County with the flooding, specifically to the area of that we're dealing with now. It was the reason why we as a board, you know, requested to have this study being done. So what I'm understanding, so I can just get a grasp on this, is that if I take this as a kind of a synopsis of what you've been providing, and I really like how comprehensive it was and very thorough, so thank you. One is that the backup that people got, or the flooding that they got in their basements, etc., was not the result of any equipment failure on the part of our pumps in that. That's not what resulted in that,
That's
correct? Okay. And that there was no sewer backup that was noted as well in your evaluation of the situation for the residents.
During our
Right.
during our monitoring period, correct.
Okay.
There was none.
What you mentioned in your report is that that sometimes there can be, I'll call cross-contamination, because it's not always clear if the stormwater and the sewer systems are, if there's a connection there, which then can allow for that cross-contamination and some type of backup. But nothing like that was noted in terms of evidence, in terms of what happened for the residents in O'Connor and that.
I'm trying to.
Yeah, I mean, from what you're saying is that there wasn't any evidence in terms of sewer backup, even with the possibility that there can be this cross-contamination aspect with the influx of water and the infiltration.
No, there was, it wasn't confirmed, but there was from some of the complaints from the residents that did come in, they were claiming that there was actual sewage back up into their
Okay.
basements.
Okay.
And so that's why that was the pretense of the study. So
Exactly.
there was claims of that. We
Okay.
did not confirm it. We
Okay.
didn't have the ability, because my flow monitoring happened during a different
Right.
time
But-
period, so we didn't have the
But that can come
information.
not because of equipment failure, but it can come because of the inflow and infiltration of those two systems.
correct,
That's what can
absolutely.
again cause the problem, because I think people are here because they want to have some answers as to how did this happen,
Right.
and more importantly, how do we prevent this from
Right.
happening again? Also, that as a result, that there was no equipment failure, that there was no sewer backup that was associated with the equipment, there wouldn't have had to be any type of reports that would have had to been submitted to EQ from the township regarding, I think there's some type of
Correct, there was no
Correct.
spillage as far as the township's infrastructure was concerned
mhm.
that warranted the need to file any reports.
Okay, so no report would have had to be filed.
Correct.
And so then, therefore, from what I'm gathering from the report, there was no, as we're trying to understand this issue, and again, for the people that were in O'Connor specifically, you know, they suffered extreme financial and personal loss. The financial is bad enough, but the personal items are things that just can't be replaced. And they've been very diligent. They've been here numerous times, you know, trying to find answers to this. But I think what we had to be careful is that, you know, we're getting the facts, that they're getting all the facts right, and that there isn't just a dissemination of misinformation, which I think was happening at the time for some of these folks. So there wasn't any type of lack of transparency or, quote, cover-up occurring by the township, because there was nothing here that the township had to hide or anything like that. So one of the concerns that I think made this matter even worse for many of these folks was the fact that there was this dissemination of misinformation, jumping to conclusions, jumping to wrong facts, not taking all the data together. This, you know, acknowledges that, which I think is real helpful. What we have tried to do is, you mentioned it's the Mission Creek's drain that goes around that area. So that's a part back by the farm. That definitely would help that neighborhood if that could be cleared out substantially all the way down, et cetera.
Correct.
And then the other possibility of what could add as well to the problem would be, I think we put in larger culverts at the end of the road bringing that water out, because there was a lot of surface water that these people were experiencing, and with that volume of surface water, that would also account for coming into the basements, et cetera, that have nothing to do with the sewer system, okay?
No, and that's a good point, because it was, I think, at the public meeting that we had, it was a misconception, because they are two separate systems.
Mm-hmm.
One storm, and what we evaluated was specific to sanitary sewer.
Right.
And yes, to summarize, as far as how the system operates and the condition it's in, there was nothing indicative from any of the reviews that we did or in comparison to DEQ guidelines that indicated that this infrastructure contributed to the problem.
Okay.
With that being said, though, we were able to basically eliminate, is what this report was allowed us the ability to do, to eliminate what would have caused it. And with where everything stands right now, the best is that there's definitely a presence of some connections that are illegal, whether they're storm from dwellings or what have you. But there has to be a connection
the
somewhere.
hookups you're talking about, okay.
And so, but as far as the infrastructure that's owned by the township and is under their jurisdiction, there wasn't anything that we found as far as how it operates and what condition it's in that contributed to cause the damage that the residents experienced.
So what I'm hearing you say is that the township was in complete compliance in terms of what they needed to do, what they needed to report, et cetera. And to the extent that we could, we did try to reach out and provide whatever assistance was available for the residents, which still wasn't adequate. I mean, again, you know, the losses were devastating. But again, I think it's important for the township to recognize, and we as a board, that that we have to be very careful about the information that we end up sharing if we don't have all the facts straight. And I think what you did when you report is you provided factual information, which is really what we as a board should be disseminating to the public. And if it's false information or misinformation, I think it makes the problem even worse for the residents because they don't know what to hold on to. And I think you were very thorough in explaining this tonight, so thank you. And I hope this was helpful for the residents too, because, you know, they're looking for answers for this. And, you know, like I said, I think with the drain, with the culverts, you know, you're mentioning maybe look for some type of illegal systems in terms of hookups. All those things are things that maybe we can look into to avoid this problem another time. And I think that's what we owe the residents, and I think that's what they've been asking for from us. So I think, thank you.
And just for everybody here, we will be putting this on our website. Hopefully we'll get up there tomorrow. So if you want to take a look at the full report, we will put that on our website so it's accessible to everybody, as well as a copy of the PowerPoint presentation so that everybody can take a look at it.
Any further questions at all? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you for allowing me to help the township.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me while I try to catch up on my agenda. That's the bad part of being electronic, is that was like a 135-page item on the agenda.
May I ask a question while you're doing it? I was just wondering, as a resident, is there something we can do? I'm one of those people who moved in, I don't know whether my home has a problem or not. What can we do as residents to figure out whether we have a problem, and what personal actions or residential actions can we take to help alleviate the problem, whether it's just for ourselves or for everybody down the sewer line? Is there any way, some way for us to get contact information or something about, talk to about that?
Yeah, and
I guess, what I hoped for you to take away from this is, to basically to do your own, to do your investigation, your due diligence, and I would suggest coordinating with a plumber to see if you do have any of those connections that exist, because as I, had said during the presentation, because it's not only a risk for the township, it's more so for the residents that with a major storm event, there's potential, if there is an illegal connection, that can get into your home. And to coordinate with the plumber to do that.
Call a couple of plumbers and they said they'd have to tear up our basement to find out. So.
And that's some of the struggle with
Cement and everything,
the
so we didn't know, I didn't know if that's really what was needed, so I was hoping to find out from an independent party who might not be just trying to make business.
Yeah, if I could just add, Jennifer, you did mention that the dye test.
Yeah, I don't think the
Well-
dye test, you could, through dye testing, I guess that would necessitate to have to tear up your basement.
Yes.
Because they were talking about putting in like a stop valve or something.
Yeah, if you do find you have one, it would need to be disconnected, but there's local contractors here that will do dye testing.
Yeah, if you're going to do dye testing, you're gonna need our assistance with that, and we're happy to do that, because we'll have to go out and take a look at if that dye comes into our manholes. So if you're going to do that testing, give us a call, you can call me, and we can schedule a time that we can have personnel out there that can take a look at the manholes, and you'll be able to, I mean, I've seen this done, you know pretty quickly that you've got an issue. And then we'll know, as the testing's being done, we'll be able to see it run through. Is it come into the manholes, or it come into the flow? Yeah.
So does that tell you whether there's a problem with outflow or inflow or both?
Well, if you would have problems with
Both ways.
inflow, if we have a storm event and it comes back up into the home, if we have an illegal connection. But what we'll be able to tell by, flipping the manholes, obviously we couldn't do the whole block at the same time because we wouldn't know which home it came from. But if, for instance, if you wanted to do your location, you could call, schedule that with us, we'll come out, we can look at the manholes that are downstream from your home, and we'll be able to tell if dye runs through that manhole. And we'll know it came from your home, because you're the only one doing the testing at that point. So there, we can, Kim Smith.
Thank you.
And just one, I think also the dye test would be the most minimally invasive, considering what needs to be done, but may offer you the most amount of information, sort of bang for the buck, so to speak, by doing that. So I think that would be a place to start for the homeowner, along with some of the things I mentioned before that we might be doing, as well with the drains, et cetera. So.
And is there a reason why the hydraulic simulation stopped at 4 inches when we received 7+ inches of water on the date in question?
Do you want me to answer?
Well, yeah.
I don't need an answer now, that's fine, but that seemed a little suspect to me, that the spike didn't happen with half the water. I'm not really concerned about half the water. We get half the water frequently. We want to know about when we get that much water, what would have happened. So,
Do you have an answer to that question?
I do, and Mark brought up that same question, and it is documented in the report as to why. But as far as to account for a huge 100-year storm event like that, I have to take it requires a much more in-depth hydraulic analysis, because you have to account for soil conditions, and there's a huge contributing watershed. And, but the reason why I did it with 25 years, because that's DEQ guidelines.
well, we may want to do it further, because this seems to be maybe a 30-year storm who look to purchase forever homes and not 10-year homes. Just a recommendation that I would have as a resident.
Thank you. All right, moving to item 7, and this is going to be public comment. And this will be restricted to 3 minutes regarding items on this agenda. It'd be on this agenda, is it?
Oh,
Yep.
We don't have,
Okay.
we don't have the agenda.
Okay.
You're not on the agenda.
Yeah. So, seeing none, we move on to reports and board comments. We have, I think, one opening, I can't remember what board it was, where,
Sidewalk.
the sidewalk, yep, that's right. And, that was,
Jeremy McDonald.
Jeremy McDonald's, and did he give us back a?
Mark had contacted him.
We have received his application. That'll be forwarded on to the planning commission. They meet next week, and they're the ones that make the appointments, other than the board appointed positions. We have that on file. It'll be part of their agenda packet
Okay.
for consideration.
All right,
Are you
otherwise.
still taking applications for that? I mean, would they still be able to get on if they, like, I had a lady call me today, and
Yeah.
she wants to be on, or she's got interest in being on that board.
There
Right.
is a opening that expires October 17th.
Yes.
And the planning commission meets the day before that, Tuesday the
Okay.
16th,
Okay,
and they would consider any applications they had on file.
okay.
So
Do you want me to have you, I'll give her your information, you can call her.
I can call her, I can get her an application tomorrow morning.
Okay. Because she expressed interest today of being on that board, if she could. And she said if she didn't get on it this year, it didn't matter. She just was interested maybe next year.
There's one opening, the planning commission will consider any number of applications to fill that opening.
Okay, I'll give her your name later. I'm sure you have her number. They just built a new house. So we've discussed their situation in here before, so, okay.
Just following up on that, Bill, real quick, I believe it's accurate to say that, applications are always accepted. There's
Yeah.
not an expiration date. If someone has interest in being on a board, please submit applications, and we'll have them on file when an opening comes. There's scheduled openings, but things happen in people's lives where sometimes they need to get off. I
We
think
keep
that's
them on file for 1 year.
Okay.
And I told her also today, I told her that if she was interested to fill out an application, and there's other boards that she could try to get on if she wanted to.
Right.
And
Okay.
if I'm not mistaken, Bill, the application form is on our website
Yeah,
as
it
well.
is, you're right.
It can be downloaded and filled out and delivered to the township office.
Yeah, looking at our expiration dates, we have multiple on the planning commission early next year. We have border review early next year, the sustainability committee. So we do have, reasonable amount of openings, so. And it's always nice to hear somebody that wants to be involved, so that's a bonus. Moving on with reports and board comments. Let's see, I know we've had some boards or some meetings that we've been able to attend. Tim, would you like to start?
I have no reports or comments at this time.
Phil?
Yeah, Ben, the Sustainability Committee is on a quarterly agenda meeting schedule. What I meant to say, it's on a quarterly meeting schedule. And there weren't any agenda items for this month's meeting, October. Would have been yesterday's scheduled meeting, so that meeting was canceled. But what it points to is that the Sustainability Committee needs some guidance from this board, because that committee reports to the board. The real sole project that the committee has been assigned to work on recently is the annual cleanup day, which has become a more of an operational project each year And it's my opinion that it's really out of the bounds of the Sustainability Committee, of its original charter, to make recommendations on issues to the board. So two things come up about the Sustainability Committee that I want to address right now. One being that there isn't anything on our agenda except the regular cleanup, which is basically an operational event that the administration and staff can facilitate, make it happen, which they do. Sign contracts, negotiate vendors, secure the site, all of that stuff. So without any other item besides that, the Sustainability Committee has nothing to do. So it needs, if this board chooses to have the Sustainability Committee continue, it needs to provide input to the committee.
So we'll take that, something we can address here as we move forward in our next meeting is.
I would recommend perhaps a good time to do that would be when we have our policy governance meeting in the next weeks. When we have that meeting on policy governance, I think that might be a good time to discuss what policies we might want the Sustainability Committee to look at. I had one other comment, if I might. It's not a committee report.
Yep, go ahead.
I noticed in the meeting, the past meeting, the last meeting that I was absent from, that we had a request from the manager to discuss his annual contract. I don't see it on this agenda. Can we place it with the head nod at maybe at our next meeting, our October 24th meeting agenda to discuss his contract?
I think you can request that and
Yeah.
it's taken care of without a vote.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Bill?
I went to the road commission meeting September 27th. They approved their 2019 budget. They did 41.25 miles of gravel roads this past year. They're planning on chip sealing 31 to 35 miles next year. I'm done.
All right. Norm?
Yeah. I had a meeting with some folks out at the tribe with their at the behavioral health clinic. The tribe has received recently a $2 million grant, a federal grant, to provide some programming primarily for their residents. 3 areas. It would be in terms of looking at addiction, particularly the opioid addiction. Looking at another program will be looking at the historic and the intergenerational trauma that many of the Native Americans have sustained through the years, and then also programs for youth as well. So I just had spoke with them and just had some input in terms of their programming of that. So see where it goes from here. But basically, I think it's really nice what they're going to be doing out there for their residents.
Lisa? No meetings this week?
It was a city meeting, but the biggest thing on the agenda was postponed.
Oh, okay. All right. And we had no EDA meetings in between, so we move on from
Ben?
there. Yes.
Pardon me. There was a sidewalk committee meeting earlier, drawing a blank on the date, I think it was near the end of September. And another issue came up, or I just wanted to share with this board something that came up at that meeting. It's not the recommendation on calling in waivers, but the sidewalk committee met with the Mid-Michigan Pathways Committee representatives discussing how the prioritization plan for sidewalk and pathways in Union Township could match up or work with goals of the Mid-Michigan Pathways Group. And it was specifically a good presentation from the Pathways Group regarding the area of our township, Isabella Road and Remus Road, and pathways and sidewalks through there. And there is some work being done to, behind the scenes, to coordinate and collaborate with the Michigan Department of Transportation and the Saginaw Chippewa Indian Tribe, along with the Mid-Michigan Pathways and perhaps Union Township and other entities, to create a pathway bridge across US 127. We thought that was like way off down the road, decades from now, and it may occur sooner. And there'll certainly be more specific information in the future, but I was excited about that bit of news, or that prospect, I should say, and I wanted to share that with you all tonight.
That's a fabulous group, and what they're able to accomplish with basically with grant money for the most part is fabulous. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's grant money and MDOT dollars, and
yeah,
you know, we kicked in money for other expansions of the pathway system.
Exactly. Yeah. It's been excellent. All right, moving from item 8 to item 9, consent agenda. We do need a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Okay, and who checked the
I looked at the
tables?
accounts payable list.
Okay. All right, all in favor of approving consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Move on to 10, which is new business. The first item is going to be a discussion action item. This is the Sidewalk Committee recommendation on calling in existing waivers.
Thank you and good evening, everybody. This agenda item is discussed on page 144 of your agenda packet. The Sidewalk Committee, Sidewalk and Pathways Prioritization Committee, you may recall was I'll say reestablished in the summer of 2017. Their first task, is outlined by this board, was to, one, create a policy to assist the Planning Commission when considering sidewalks as they relate to the site plan approval process. They've completed that task. They presented a policy to this body. This body adopted it, and the Planning Commission now utilizes it. The second task that they were given in terms of priorities was this Board of Trustees wanted the Sidewalk Pathways Committee to prioritize the revocation of the existing sidewalk waivers that are out there. And over the years, the Planning Commission, as is their, I'll say, right, waived the requirement that the developer put in a sidewalk. There are 23 of those existing waivers that are out there right now. And the committee, Sidewalk Pathways Committee, they met on August 13th to develop this recommendation. And the recommendation that is in front of you tonight is a result of that work. And what they are recommending is that all the waivers that exist on sidewalks that are classified as, or on streets that are classified as priority streets, which are outlined on a map, which is part of the sidewalk policy that was adopted by this board and utilized by the Planning Commission. Any waiver that currently exists on those streets be called, or be revoked. And that would, if approved by this body, if accepted by this body, that would cause the administration to contact those 7 owners and begin a dialogue to that sidewalk be installed within the next 2 years, which is also part of that policy that was adopted by this board. The 7 locations are listed in your memo. In addition to the address, we also listed the name of the store, if you will, or the complex, so you might get some understanding of where it's at. So that's what's before you tonight for your consideration. And again, it's what you have to decide tonight is whether or not you want to accept their recommendation, and as an extension of that, instruct staff to contact these 7 and begin that process.
I have a question on some of these. Is our goal to have sidewalk on both sides of the street? Because, take for instance, the jump station. There's 2 instances I can point out to here. Okay, we recently had a deal where Riverwood is gonna have to put sidewalk in. That's on the north side of Broomfield Road. So we're gonna come down to Broomfield Road, we're gonna have half a mile there from, just say Whiteville Road, half a mile east, okay? Well, eventually, I'm assuming that we're gonna try to have sidewalk or a pathway all the way to Broomfield Road, okay? We've talked in the past how on that same side of the road, the city already has sidewalk out to the community church.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're talking the jump station on the south side of the road. Okay, we're gonna have sidewalk there, we're gonna have people coming down. If eventually we have sidewalk from that whole mile, just say, between Whiteville and Lincoln Road, on the north side of the road, then we're gonna require people to cross that busy road to the south side of the road to get on more sidewalk, then go back across the road again to connect to the city. I mean,
Bill?
you've got that there, and then down the road here, we've got Pleasant Optics. They're on the east side of the road. And then we look over at Oak Meadows Condominiums, they're on the west side of the road. So my question is that what our goal is, to have sidewalk on both sides? Especially when they're not, a lot of them are dead-end sidewalks.
Ben, if I might. Bill, the way I look at it is that our goal is to enforce the ordinances that we have in place. And our ordinance says that when a site plan is submitted to the Planning Commission, that it shall include sidewalks. And the list of properties here had the sidewalks on their site plan, and they were temporarily waived until this board deemed it time to call them in, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where we are in this process. It wasn't about what side of the road the sidewalk is on. It was in alignment with the ordinance that requires a sidewalk when a site plan is presented. So with the background that has been presented before us, I would make the motion that we accept the existing sidewalk waiver revocation recommendations from the Township Sidewalk and Pathway Prioritization Committee, and therefore instruct the staff to contact owners of selected parcels to develop a plan for sidewalk construction in accordance with the Township sidewalk policy.
I'd
That's-
support your motion, Phil.
Thank you, Tim. Ben, if I might
Yes.
speak to the motion first. I do recognize your concerns that you expressed, Bill. Certainly, it's obvious that now there are sidewalks on one side of the street at a certain section of a road, and another side of the street at the other section of the road, and the city has sidewalks at certain places along there. streets. But this is the whole process that we go through with modernizing our community, is one step at a time, by the rules and ordinances that we have in place. And yeah, indeed, at this point in time and in the next 2 years, there's going to be a little inconsistent flow of pedestrian traffic. But what we'll also have is continuation of construction of a network for safe, non-motorized transportation. And that's why I'm in favor of pulling in these waivers.
If I could just follow up. You both bring very, very solid and valid points forward. And Bill, I think you made a case for answering your own question. Is that a goal of ours to have sidewalks on both sides of the road? I would see it from your description as certainly. You don't want people, especially younger children who have less observations when crossing busy roads, to have to ride down the sidewalk, shoot across the road, pick up the sidewalk. So I think it makes real good sense that that would be the high level vision of what the sidewalks, pathways, whatever they become to be on both sides of the road.
Phil, the sidewalk boundary, or I think it's referred to as the designated priority streets, when the Sidewalk and Prioritization Committee were discussing it, was that division for both sides? I mean, ultimately, I hear Bill's points. You know, I appreciate what you're saying too. But was that division that was spoken about? I mean, I hear what you're saying as far as filling the infill all the way down, and eventually have a consistency all the way on both sides. But was that the goal? Is to have on some of these main drags? Because even there's another one here too on like Merchandise Outlet. You know, they're on the north side, and then on the south side we just called in a waiver from the bank that's on the corner opposite from the by Lincoln and Remus. So that wouldn't be on the south side. But was there a discussion about that the goal was to try to get sidewalks on both sides for that boundary area?
There was discussion about the location of the sidewalks, and it was pointed out in the discussion that a certain sidewalk is on one side of the road and another sidewalk is on another side of the road, and there was discussion about existing sidewalks, where are they now, in reference to any one individual property that we were what I mean to say is, when we were discussing the boundaries and the prioritization list, yeah, we discussed where were there existing sidewalks. It was not within our purview to determine whether there shall or shall not be sidewalks on a certain side of the road. What guided us was the ordinance as it stands, that there shall be sidewalks presented with a site plan. What we did recognize was there are certain areas in the township that definitely need sidewalks without any relief given to the property owner. Mm-hmm. And that's what that plan that we presented provides, a description of where there shall be no question about whether there'll be sidewalks, whether it's on the north side or south side.
Gotcha. Okay.
That really didn't come into, specifically didn't come into play of, well, is there going to be a sidewalk
Mm-hmm.
here and one there? And the reason for that is, who knows what property will be developed and when. Mm-hmm. But what we do know, that when a property is developed, there shall be a sidewalk.
So the consistency that you're trying to do in this, as for the committee, is that is holding to that any site plan would require a sidewalk. There's criteria in which that can be temporarily waived, or relieved, as he's talking about it now. But that around the, what I call the growth boundary, in that area, that's where it will be mandatory, that if there's a site plan, sidewalks required, so, but in that catchment area, that's where they want to have sidewalks, and that's why these 7 of the 23 are being called in, because it seems that they're all within that,
Yes.
that boundary. So I call it like a sidewalk boundary. I don't know what the terminology. I think there was something about a
We
designated.
call it a street priority.
Street priority,
Yes.
okay. So, so that would be, so you're only calling in 7 of the 23, and that's only because those are the ones that now are within that sidewalk boundary, correct?
That's what we looked at,
Yeah.
at this meeting that's referenced in the
Mhm.
presentation. We looked at this relief or waivers that were in the prioritization list that we were looking at.
Okay, and I know from having been on the planning commission and that there had been concern that once we call in a waiver, that people, you kind of spring it on the person, like, they may not be prepared to do it. What I like in here is that you're talking about that the township will work in coordination with the person, with the resident who's now required to put in the sidewalk, and also that they have 2 years for it to be completed. So it gives them time to measure up in terms of the finances and work with the township as far as the construction. So it seems that there's been give and take on both sides to try to make this thing work, which I think, which I like about the way this has been put together.
Yes, we did think about both sides of the table, the citizens and the needs of the citizens and the property owners and the needs of the township. And you're right, what you're recognizing as a compromise that we established.
Yeah.
I have a question are you done?
For me?
Are you also? I have a question for you, Mark. In our 2019 proposed budget, we already know we're gonna do this project. Lincoln Road south to Broomfield Road, we're gonna reconstruct the corner. We're gonna add lanes. Do we have sidewalk on both sides of the road figured into that? East and west of Lincoln Road, north and south of Broomfield Road. We're gonna be adding 600 feet, I believe, to the east. We're gonna add like 300 feet to the west, if I remember right. So there's 1,800 feet of sidewalk on both, if we figure both sides of the road. And then if we're gonna be doing Lincoln Road from the bridge to Broomfield, that's gotta be 600 feet there anyway. So there's another 1,200 feet. Are we as the township gonna be doing that? I mean, we're doing the construction. It seems to me like we should be putting sidewalk in. That should have been figured in that project.
If I understand this program correctly, if I can just try and answer since it's the board meeting, that's not really property owners and site plan reviews. That's, easements, roadways, county property. We're participating in funding the county to improve these roads, but I may be wrong, but I interpret the sidewalks come into when a property owner is doing a improvement, a site plan, building a building, something like that. So I'm just thinking it won't necessarily be a requirement doing roads. However, I certainly think it makes a lot of sense to consider. Are we making wider shoulders for bikers or things, or is it an appropriate time like construction's on site, things are mobilized to do sidewalks and such? But I guess I would need a little clarification that they seem like, in my mind, two different apples, one being the county doing road construction and a property owner of a parcel creating a home or
Right, I understand what you're saying.
commercial thing, and that's where the sidewalk question comes forth.
Or for that matter, simply putting the infrastructure in currently while they're working on it to actually have crosswalks if they're doing the intersection.
But if I might add,
Yeah.
sidewalks at any other part of the township besides these 7 properties are not the topic of the motion that we should be discussing right now.
Okay, so with that, I think Trustee Mikus is calling to question.
He made a proposal, or he made a motion, and nobody seconded it.
Tim,
Yep, Tim did.
Oh, did?
Yep,
Oh, that's right,
we were in
that's right, he
discussion,
did,
so I'm taking it a call to question then.
No, I was asking particularly just if you would try to direct the comments and discussion towards the motion.
Okay. Certainly.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Any further discussion on this item? I think we can take this to vote. So this would be for the approval of the sidewalk committee's recommendations and calling in the existing waivers. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
And we move on to item B, which is going to be the award the bid for construction services for office remodel at the Isabella Treatment Facility to JBS Contracting.
Thank you. This is on page 149 of your agenda packet. This is, just to take you back a little bit, the Board of Trustees approved this project as part of the 2018 budget approval. There's currently $160,000 budgeted for this. Half of that exists in the water fund, half exists in the sewer fund. And I indicated at the last meeting that the construction contract component of this had come in quite a bit higher than we'd originally thought, and that we were going to then go back and look at the project itself, and then we had some post-bid addendums that we created and circulated to the bidders, and that tonight we would be anticipating bringing this contract to you. So it's here in front of you tonight. A layout of the proposed remodeling was put at your seat earlier this evening. And at this point, I'd ask that Kim Smith come up and talk about the project and the contract in a little bit more detail.
You want to sink down there, huh?
Right.
No. For little people.
Good evening. Tonight, for your consideration, is the approval of the bid for the Isabella Treatment Facility remodel project. And as Mark mentioned, in the 2018 budget, we had funds budgeted to do a remodel of the existing area at the Isabella Treatment Facility to convert it into office space. The office space would be used to accommodate future and existing staff. The plan currently is to have all of the Public Services Department personnel that are currently housed in the Township Hall would be moving to this location once the remodel is complete, and that would in turn free up needed office space here at the Township Hall. So that's kind of the purpose of why we're looking at doing this project. In April of 2018, I'm just going to kind of do a timeline of what we had, because the project started, early in the year, and so I'll just kind of do a little timeline here of the steps that have taken to get us to where we're at tonight, if you guys will indulge me for just a couple of minutes. In April of 2018, after consideration of 3 proposals for architectural services by the board, it was awarded to Goodrow and Associates. And since then, we have been working with them on the design and layout of the area, the needs that are for the staff, and the needs for what needs to happen in the back portion of that building. Most of you, I think all of you, have been at the location. In the area, as Mark referenced, there's a floor plan, but the area that we're talking about used to house a iron removal filter and pumps So it's a bare bones lot building. And as you are aware, we've taken the filter out and done some work, taken the pumps out, moved some electrical equipment in order to accommodate this project. We did have, in July, there was an amendment to the contract with Goodrow to include some structural work that needed to be looked at. Once we took the iron removal filter out of the building official had some concerns about the roof patch. We did a 14 by 14 roof patch in that room, and he had some concerns about that and wanted that to be looked at through a structural engineer. So we engaged with Goodrow, who then engaged with a structural engineer to take a look at that to provide that information to the building official. And then in August of 2019, after further working with Goodrow to finish plans and have a good bid documents, we went out to bid on August 19th. There was an advertisement in the Morning Sun. There was it was sent to the local Home Builders Association plan room on August 22nd and distributed to all of the members that are part of their, I believe it's an email system. Actually, I know it is because I've seen the emails that we were copied on those. That went out on August 24th. That correspondence included the bid advertisement as well as information on a pre-bid meeting that was being held on, I believe the pre-bid conference was on August 27th at the Isabella Wall site. And that was held so that potential contractors could come to the site, have their questions answered, as well as do a tour of the site and look at the specific spaces that they would be working in. So that was held. Further, there was also copies of this advertisement put in plan rooms through the Association of Michigan Plan Room and the Builders Exchange of Michigan. So it not only went to our local plan room, but we further reached out to other plan rooms that we could possibly get some bidders from. So then, as I mentioned, on August 27th, we held the pre-bid meeting at the Isabella Well site. We had 8 contractors that were at the pre-bid meeting. And then on September 6th, we had a bid opening here at the Township Hall. The size of this project does call for sealed bids, so we did receive sealed bids. We received 2 sealed bids, one from JBS Contracting and the other from Griffiths Builders. JBS is a local contractor. They actually did the remodel here in town, or here at the Township Hall several years ago, and they've done numerous projects around the township and the city. They work all over. And then we received another bid from Griffith Builders. They're out of Lake. And as indicated in your request for board action, those bids came in higher than what we had initially estimated for this project. The initial estimate for this project was at $60 a square foot, and the bids came in at $81 per square foot. So upon receiving those bids, we felt like we needed to take a step back and look at the project and see if there was some areas that maybe we could save some money or something, or get some more definite ideas on where a lot of that money was going in the bids. So we asked them to do a post-bid addendum, the 2 bidders. JBS did provide us with a post-bid addendum, and we met with Goodrow. Mark and I met with Goodrow and talked about some items that we could possibly remove from the project just to bring the cost down and keep it a little closer to where our original budget was at. So in doing that, we eliminated 3 items which were outlined in your request for board action. One of those was, if you look at your drawings, we had looked at doing some remodeling in what I call the new portion of the building, because that was a addition that was done in 2010 and 11. And it's currently being used for, it's a multi-purpose room. We hold meetings there. It also holds a kitchenette for people to have their lunch. And we looked at changing that into an office, part of it into an office, the other side would be made into like a multi-purpose room for copy machine, filing, those type of things, and the kitchenette would be moved to the back portion that we're remodeling. The other thing that we looked at doing was putting a kiosk in the front entry so that if residents came there and wanted to make a payment, for instance, online or credit card, they'd have that ability. We did not plan on taking cash there. That would still have to be done at the Township Hall, but it would be a convenience for the residents to be able to pay a water bill or a sewer bill there. So we looked at that. And then the other things that were looked at to remove is when we looked at the plans and we're looking at the different things that had to be done in rooms, we had added some painting in the, what I'll again call the new portion of the building, down the long hallway as well as the two offices, and adding some carpet to the two offices in the front to make them more comfortable for people who are actually going to be sitting there all day now instead of intermittently during the day like it's used now. And we also found an issue in the back area of the old part of the building, which housed the iron removal filter, that when we took the ceiling out to take the iron filter out, we found numerous beehives in there, active beehives. So those were removed, and we also found that there was not a lot of insulation up there. So we added some insulation in the back portion as in the ceiling, as well as putting in some drywall on the ceiling that would seal that off, so we can take care of the bee issues that obviously we had that we weren't aware of until we opened it up. Because there will be people occupying that space, you know, during working hours, so it needs to be a nice usable space for people. So those were some things that were added to the project that did drive the cost up some, but a lot of the cost we feel is, you know, we've been seeing jobs come in high the last several bids that we've done for other projects, and if you talk to other people who are doing similar types of work, bids are coming in higher. Contractors are much busier than they were a few years ago, so so that could account for some of that as well. So as I was talking about, you know, there were several items that we eliminated in order to try to bring that cost down. One was the front area, which I talked about, the payment center, the additional offices. We also, by doing that, we were able to eliminate moving that casework back to the back. There was some substantial cost there, about $8,500. And then they also offered a voluntary alternate, which was a change in the HVAC unit. So that's a $4,000 reduction. We will have to confirm that the HVAC unit that they have specified meets the standards that we need for the building, and we can do that. Once we have JBS on board, then we can go through that process, or actually the architect can go through that process and make sure that that's an acceptable alternate. So tonight, what I'm asking is approval or the award of the bid to JBS Contracting in the amount of $110,000, $110,548, to complete the construction, the remodel of the back old portion of the Isabella Treatment Facility to accommodate the replacement of some offices.
All right.
Kim, may I ask a question?
Sure.
At that August 27th pre-bid meeting, did I hear you say there were 8 contractors
Yes.
present?
There were 8 contractors present.
Thank you.
There were 3 generals and the rest were subs.
Good, thanks.
Kim, I guess as opposed to just seeing that the cost came in at a higher price than was anticipated, and you guys made the decision, I guess, to look at what can we eliminate. There wasn't consideration given or to come to the board and say, this is the scope of the project that was set out, this is the cost, it's more than we anticipated, and maybe put a case for why we should do the full project instead of scaling back. Just kind of a thought, a question there.
Yep, we did. We talked about that. And what we tried to do was we tried to weigh, you know, we're gonna gain an office and some filing space in the front versus, you know, we lose our kitchen area, which is an important thing because many of the utility guys and other people that will be working out there will need that space. That could be moved to the back. Now we wouldn't have to do that. We did think about that, and we kind of weighed that, and we thought the cost to do that was high. I mean, it's $26,000, and we felt that was a lot of money to do that remodel in the front. I think the thing that we were most hesitant to eliminate was the kiosk in the front, but I don't think that that totally eliminates our ability to do that. I think that we can do that later on and still be able to provide that. We had a window between an office and that front area so you could have an easy line of sight, and not since then, because we are recommending to eliminate that, we're gonna add a camera to that area so that we'll be able to see through our monitors on our computers that somebody's walked into that front area if we don't hear the door open. So, and we're gonna put a buzzer out there, so we'll know if somebody comes into that area and they need help. So we tried to accommodate that we're not gonna be doing that kiosk right now, but I don't think it's something that can't happen in the future.
Yeah, so I was just wanting to I was assuming that, you know, you looked at various alternates, you know, moving forward, and, you know, it could cost a little more now, but would it have been the right choice to spend a little more now as opposed to go back and get back into the construction process?
And we really did try to weigh that out when we made that decision. The other thing that we've done, our utility guys did, is because if we wanted to do that in the future, after we remodel that back portion, the hardest part to do that is going to be the drain for moving the kitchenette. Because then you'd have to tear up the whole space in order to put a drain underneath, because it's a concrete slab. So we've actually, we had some other patching we had to do on the floor, so I had them put that drain in. And we've just left it there so it can be accessed later. If we ever wanted to do that, it was a very minimal cost. The guys are very capable of doing that, so we did have them do that. So that if in the future it doesn't totally eliminate that, we could do that. We could move that kitchenette. We could build that wall between those two offices and make those, or put a wall in between that area and, you know, make an office if we needed it. So we tried to plan for that just in case.
Great, thanks.
I'm not against this project. I mean, I'm gonna vote for it. But I'm gonna say one thing. We went about this whole thing wrong. I talked to the architect. They weren't contacted until January of this year. We had 3 days, we had 4 days, a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Actually, not even Monday, because the walkthrough was on Monday. That doesn't give contractors enough time. Everybody's busy. It doesn't give them enough time. I mean, I'm in this business. Normally what happens is there's a bid announcement. You have a chance. There's, you know, a week, 10 days, 2 weeks where you go in and they announce that, just say the walkthrough is going to be the 27th. We should have let people know the 15th of August that we were going to do this, not 3 days before. We approved this money before we even had we approved some of this last year before we even had a site plan in front of us. We knew nothing what was going on. We didn't know how many offices there were going to be. People don't go out and build a house And the builder comes up to him and says, it's gonna cost you $250,000 to build this house. Oh, okay. What am I getting for it? After I say, okay, what am I getting for it now? They know ahead of time. We didn't know ahead of time what we were getting. I mean, these bids came in $148,000, $170,000. I think we should have known this up front. I'm not happy the way that this was presented. I talked to JBS. They also agree that there wasn't a whole lot of time to, you read it on the 24th and the 27th, there's a walkthrough. Well, usually in a walkthrough, a general contractor will call and say, hey, are you interested in going to this walkthrough? To their subcontractors. Right there is one thing that explains to me why there's only 8 people there. There really wasn't enough time, so in the future I'd like to see us go about it the right way. Either hire an architect on to begin with to tell us what propose the project to an architect, have them bring it to us, and they would have a preliminary budget and then go from there. Or we have many design builders. A project like this, we really didn't need an architect. We could have used a design builder. John Statfeld from JBS told me that today, or Friday. He said that they could have done this whole project. We wouldn't have needed an architect. So just in the future, I'd like to see us maybe follow the guidelines a little closer.
I'm going to speak on this also. I spent quite a bit of time on this, is in my mind, obviously, looking at over the course of the time that we'd gotten the agenda. My wife's family is also in the building trades, and so I'm aware of how the process works. I asked deeper how the process worked. I was confused about why there could only be 2 bidders. So I set forth and contacted basically the biggest players in that industry locally. You have JBS, you have Denali, you have Konowinski, you have Greenwald, and you've got Garber. And so when I posed the question, why didn't they bid on it? There was only one of them that were even aware of the project, besides JBS, and that was Konowinski Construction, and they didn't know about it until Monday at 9 o'clock, or actually 10:37, excuse me, 2.5, less than 3 hours from when the walkthrough was. So they couldn't do it. The 24th is a Friday. The 27th at 1 o'clock is, what, 1.5 business days. That was also before Labor Day weekend, so a lot of these contractors were working on a short week to begin with. The following week, I think the sheer fact that we had essentially one bid that was incomplete and one that was complete, we're basically taking one bid at this point in time. Anything over $10,000 requires 3. In my mind, and again, when I contacted the HBA today, yesterday I should say, and talked with them, they said generally as a rule it's not unusual to see such a short time span, but it's not very often. And typically they see 2, maybe even 3 weeks, and at that point you get quality bidders. My mind is set on the fact that, number one, we don't have 3 bids. It's over $10,000. I'm going to simply tell you right now, I'm not going to vote for this. Number 2 is that, in my thought, only getting really 1 qualified bid should have put it back to the point that we need to get more. And that was not done. And so that is not a good use of public money. My mind's pretty much set up. And there's no way in the world that I can vote for this project as it is. Would anybody else like to converse before we take it to vote?
You need
Well,
a
Ben,
motion first.
we have nothing to vote on. There's no motion, so
Okay.
allow me to make the motion.
Why don't you make a motion then?
I would move that we award the bid for construction services for office remodeling at the Isabella Treatment Facility to JBS Contracting in the amount of $110,548 for this construction project as outlined before us.
Seeing no second, we continue discussion.
No, I would say we move on to the next agenda item. We have nothing to discuss.
All right.
Well, let me inject, because I think there's some points that have been made by three of you regarding the process. And I'm hearing is that there's people aren't satisfied with the manner in which it was done, either during the course of the bidding to come back with a change, a work change, talk to us about what was going to be done or why, perhaps not having to whittle it down to the extent that they did, maybe just go ahead, but wanting to be more involved in the process. Both of you mentioned something very comparable. So to me, I hear a policy issue that's brewing around as to what is it that you want? To what extent do you want to be, as a board, do you want to be involved in the work that management is doing? Because they did their due diligence, from what I see, to the best of their ability, being that these are the number of bids that they got. If it was the board's desire that they then come back and just say, well, that's not good enough, we're going to get more bids or whatever, I hear a policy statement here. And I think you have to be very, two things. I think we have to be specific about what it is that we want. And number two, make sure that's what we want. Because I'm not sure, I mean, again, we're trying to have a differentiation here between what our role is as a board. We did vote on this at one point to give them the authorization to do it. But what you're saying, for example, Bill, is that in the future you'd rather have a more complete project package, maybe like a site plan. You'd like to have more bidding, and you'd like to have the bids allow for a longer period of time for those bids to be assimilated. So there's a policy statement here. So my sense is that if we're just going to put this on hold right now, then I think we need to be very specific with management and with staff as to what it is that we're expecting them to be doing. Because this is something we've been talking about for a year now in terms of trying to get this thing up and running. It's apparent that we do need the space. I mean, it's it's like sardines in here with the space. So maybe I just think there really needs to be some discussion right now. I mean, what instead of letting this thing just go lie dead, what is it that you're asking them to do? Because they want to go ahead with this remodeling project, and we definitely need it to be done. So is there something that you're asking management and staff to do that will allow them to bring this then back so we can get this thing up and running? Because we do have a bid, so my feeling is that, I'd like to see this thing happen, but I'm also hearing the dissension among the board, and I think that, again, there's a policy issue here that maybe we need to look at. So,
How about in the future, Norm, if we get a qualified estimate, just say, a simple way of putting it? We were told a year ago in our budget that I believe it was $70,000. I was looking for it a minute ago. I think it was $70,000 for the project. Well, it comes in, $90,000 or $80,000 more.
mm-hmm.
So I think what we should have done is, okay, it's a great project. I agree, it's a great project, maybe what we should have did is instructed Mark to go out and talk to one of the design builders. You know, you've got like the ones that Ben had mentioned. Hire one of them on to give us a cost estimate, and then look and see if we're interested in spending that amount of money. I mean, we went through, we okayed taking the old tank out, we okayed an electrical update, and we didn't even know what we were gonna do. We're just gonna tear this out, here's an empty building, so now let's go out and get bids. And we didn't do that. I mean, our staff made the bid up. They didn't go out and get a, you know, I was told earlier here that the architect was contacted like in April of last year. No, they weren't. I asked them this week or last week, whatever, and they said they were contacted in January of this year, after we approved the money. So there's my deal. I'm not opposed to the project. I mean, I know JBS would do a good job, but it's the way we went about it. We didn't, if our management would have came to us and said this is a $150,000 project, then we could have voted on that. And if we would have done it that way, we probably would have had a $150,000 project done instead of all the cuts in it. They would have gotten what they wanted. But now it makes us look good when we make these cuts, because a $150,000 project now becomes a $110,000 project. So I think just in the future we need to watch what we do.
Yeah,
And maybe that's our responsibility to give our management a little more direction.
So what I'm hearing is that the board is wanting to have a bit more oversight in a matter like this in terms of how it's being done, and also our number one responsibility as a board is our fiduciary responsibility. So we want to make sure that we're looking at evaluating the costs that come in. So how do we go forward with this? Because, you know, there's a project here that money's already been spent on to get this thing going. You know, we've ripped out things, and, you know, it's set up for construction.
And you know, I'm going to interject something too and Norm, you just said it, is, and Bill just said it also, is that, so we had an architect that came on in January. We were told that they were involved in the beginning. So, okay, that's new. I didn't know that one. So my other problem is this, is that when we look at this patch that was put on the roof of that building, I don't know if you've been out there, but it's basically a square box sitting on top of the structure. So who did that work? Number one. Why was that work done not per code? Number two. But if we would have hired a qualified design builder, then instead of spending $4,100 or wherever it was for this structure that's going to have to get torn out, that you actually would have done everything at the same time. We're paying $21,000 to an architect that looks like they laid out floor space. I don't know where to start, and so.
Well, Ben.
No, I'm not done.
May I?
No, I'm not done. I haven't given you the floor yet. I'm finishing. So we had $3,850 for a structural engineer. And so for a commercial building permit, our building inspector needs to have a stamped engineering document. Did we have a stamped engineered document before we took the roof off of the water plant?
No.
Because we can't have a permit unless we have that. So
We didn't take the roof off the water
you
plant.
opened up the roof, that's structural. So therefore, you can't do that unless you have a building permit.
I'll speak for the administration. for the rest of this conversation.
Mark,
if
you don't have the
given
floor yet,
opportunity.
sir. And so
I'm
I,
just
no,
indicating
you
to
didn't,
Kim that
you,
she
you
won't
did not
respond
have the
to
floor, Mark. We had another gentleman over here, Mr. Lannon, that wanted to talk, and Mr. Micas. Go ahead.
If I may. So from my point of view, this is a project that the board discussed and we appropriated funds to do. We thought it's a worthy expenditure and a needed effort. But that's about, in my mind, where we should have let it go. We're directing the vision of the township. We saw the need. We agreed that that's a good expenditure. I think what's taken place and why I didn't support this at this time is showing how when a board is not operating under the rules that we agreed to through our policy of how we operate, then the board throws the brick in the gears of progress. And I think this is a demonstration of what takes place when we fail to realize what our duties on the board are and try to get into micromanaging the folks that we've empowered to accomplish the visions we set forth. And here we go, we've come to a point, at least on this action item, that it tonight became, you know, not a motion because it wasn't supported. It, some people would say it died. When there's not a second, it didn't take place. It didn't live. And so I think that's something for the board to consider. I know there's differing opinions. There's argumentation going on. We've discussed it a number of times. You know, we need to have professional, respectful dialogue. We come to a decision. It could be a split decision, but whatever is decided, it's supported in one voice. This wasn't voted on. It didn't become a motion. And I think the way we're operating is not serving our citizens well because we're not operating very well as a board.
One thing I will say is our main, oops, I'm sorry. Phil had the floor next. I'm sorry.
Phil.
Thank you, Ben. Tim, I heard what you said about the action of this board focusing on the wrong items tonight. And I'm also hearing false statements made by members of this board, similar to, I heard false statements said by members of this board tonight. And false statements made by members of this board is also a violation of the policy governance structure that we all agreed to participate in. One false statement I heard tonight, Ben, was the discussion about the roof not being to code. Other false statements I've heard tonight were about the cost of the project being X amount of dollars at one point in time, and now it's a different number. The original cost estimate for the project was $158,797. If we were to approve one line item in the project, which is the construction cost, that doesn't include the demolition project that's already occurred and a roof replacement that's already occurred and electrical upgrades that have already occurred. But we're just tonight discussing one line item, the estimated construction costs that changed from $92,000 in the original cost estimate to $110,548 that we're being asked to approve this one line item tonight. And again, Tim mentioned we've already approved the project. The original cost estimate, the new revised cost estimate is indeed higher than the original cost estimate. The original cost estimate of the one line item that we're being asked to approve tonight increased by a mere $18,000, which is a 20% increase, granted. But we know why costs have gone up. We've seen costs go up in other projects, from estimate to actual bids that have been presented to us. So if we then look at the entire project, not just the estimated, not just the cost construction, or the construction costs that we're being asked to approve tonight, the whole project increased $24,000 or 15%. And we've seen why, because the estimate was at $60 per square foot construction. But today, with the way contractors are busier and their availability is different than in the past, and other costs that go into it, the total project cost now is an increased 15% of a project we've already approved. The process that that the township reached to get to this point, I think, is a different subject that certainly we can talk about at another time when we want to talk about how deep into the weeds we want to get and how micromanaging we want to get. But we should be truthful and honest and avoid false statements and misrepresentation of facts as we go through this process. And I think that I heard members of this board, including myself, say they would approve this project, but yet we don't have a second to a motion to approve the project. So I'm befuddled as to the motivation of members of this board. And I'd like to see a motion to approve this project so we can move forward.
First of all, it's not the action item itself. It's a simple fact that we had very few bidders. We, in talking with the general contractors, there was a general lack of awareness. There was a willingness, if there was notice given, and we are dealing with public money. And we do have a line of $10,000 requiring 3 bids. So, in essence, I would like to make a motion that we take this back to the bidding process and obtain the proper amount of bids. And once those bids are attained, that this item comes back to us for approval. All right, so seeing no approval or motion on that,
I think,
It's not fair to JBS if we do.
right.
yeah.
I want to say one more thing. In psychology, we talk about conversation. There's the content and there's the process. The content is the stuff we're talking about in terms of the bid, the money, what should have been done this way, that way. That's the content of the conversation. I have no problem with us respectfully disagreeing on issues in terms of content. I think that's what we as a board are. We should be bringing in, I think that's our due diligence, to bring in up forth our ideas about things like this. What I'm concerned about, and it's happened over and over again, I think we've seen another episode again tonight, of civility being lost in this board. And I think that that's a very destructive quality that's taking place. I recently sent out an email to folks indicating that we need to get away from this contentious tone, that it's okay to disagree, it's okay to debate the issues, but it can be done in a respectful, constructive, and professional manner. And some of which has happened before there was a loss of civility. And I believe that that type of tone is unacceptable in this board. It's inappropriate, and we should never tolerate it. And I think that's the breakdown that's occurring here. It's not the content, it's the process. There's an undercurrent, and we know where the undercurrent comes from. And I think that this undercurrent has to stop in this board in order for us to proceed, because we're here for the benefit of our residents. And when we have the type of stuff that just happened a little while ago, I think it's the grossest disservice that we can do to the people that elected us. When we lose civility, when we respond sharply to one another in the way that it was done, it's absolutely unacceptable. It should never happen again.
All right. Any further discussion on this item at all?
Yes. If I might ask Mark to address some issues that were asked.
Certainly.
Can I second Phil's original motion? It is only 18,000 different than what it was.
You can certainly
Lisa, you
do
can
that.
make that motion, and I would second it.
All right, I'll make the motion.
And I'll second the motion.
All right.
And in discussion, I was hoping this process, this discussion, whether it can, I'm assuming it can, come back up. It never really died.
No?
It was on life support, I guess. But I'm happy to see it come before us again.
As I said, I said I was gonna vote for it. I mean,
And I think we can have that motion. And to move the project forward, we can also, and it doesn't have to be any more tonight, but we can advise staff or management if there's a different way we would like to have that process done. It's part of what we're here for. It's providing directive. It's part of it's part of just a discussion. It's setting policy. There's so many ways that we can change things in a very constructive manner. If you just put away the white heat and talk about it civilly. So I think it's important that in doing this, that we allow management to go forward with this, but we might have some issues as to how we would like to be approached in the future. And I think that can be a discussion at a later date.
well, like I said before, I mean, I don't think we gave management enough guidance of what we wanted. I mean, maybe back last year when we were talking about this in the budget, you know, maybe being that I'm in this business, I should have maybe said to Mark, hey, have you got any bids from anybody yet? Have you talked to anybody? But we never really had any discussion about it. We just said, okay, when we okayed the budget, Mark had mentioned that we're gonna do this project, and we all agreed to it. We didn't discuss it though. Which, I'm taking responsibility for that too. I mean, I should have asked questions back then. So,
I would like at least a week minimal notice for the next project, you know, from advertising to doing the walkthrough, so they have at least a week to.
yeah, well, we didn't give them the
Well, we
guidance.
could talk
Well, yeah.
about that instead of
But as
some-
far as this one, I mean, I think we can vote on it now, pretty much, and go to the next
Okay,
one.
you have to make a motion.
I already made my
Oh, you
motion.
made- there was a, Or you didn't,
Yeah.
did you make the motion?
It's already on the
Oh,
table,
okay,
so.
gotcha, okay.
Okay, so we'll take this to vote, and this would be to approve.
May I comment?
Yes, sir.
I appreciate it coming back up and the discussion continuing to allow that to happen. I do want to clarify a couple points that were made. When the project was originally brought forward back in November of 18, it was based on an informed opinion as to what it would cost. We went out and used an estimate of square foot for office remodeling for the amount of square footage in that in that square. The board approved it in concept, approved a good chunk of money for the construction component of the project only. And at the time, we then came back with a recommendation to hire an architect to firm up the costs, which we did. And you all approved that contract, and it outlined 4 main areas that they were going to do, and they've been doing those. And in their contract that you approved, they estimated between $70,000 and $90,000 for this construction component. And that was before you in February, when you approved this contract with the architect. We have been going about the business of executing what I thought was a pretty clear directive to create some space for the acknowledged need that we need more staff to support the citizens and the organization in the manner that you're wanting them to be supported. There is nothing that says that a project requires 3 bids. There's guidance about projects over $10,000 and 3 bids. For projects this size, it requires sealed bids be put out on the street, which we did. We don't control the number of bidders that responded. I appreciate the input on the time span between what some folks think might have been too short of a time frame, what other folks are thinking was reasonable, and what even was said tonight that is not uncommon. This organization has managed a lot of projects over the years. Y'all built a multi-million-dollar water and sewer system. So you've demonstrated an ability to manage these projects, and we're not doing anything different on this $100,000 project that you haven't, as a township, done before. Bids came in higher, and as part of our responsibility, my responsibility, we sat down and talked about everything from let's send it back out onto the street, because I also recognize that there were 2 bids received. We talked about doing that. We talked about what that would mean to the existing bidders, since their bids were already public, and how that would be managed throughout the purchasing process, and possible protests that might come from people that had bid originally. We talked about how to scale down the project, because we recognized it was over budget and money is important to us. So we did all those things. You know, and so I'll conclude with as far as I'm concerned, we followed the direction of the board, the policies that are out there. We are going about the business of executing the policy that you all have directed us to do. And if the board wants to send this back out, that's fine. But to bring it forward and then have not even a second on it, you know, for other reasons extraneous to the project that we all agreed to, is a bit troubling to me. And it leaves me in a bit of a quandary as to how to go about executing the directions of the board. I know that we've talked about policy governance and bringing some folks in to try to help us collectively learn more about that, which we're in the process of doing. And again, I'll just conclude with appreciating the board continued the dialogue on this, so we got to the point where we ended up. I just wanted to clarify a couple things about what actually happened in the process. Thank you for that opportunity.
You're very welcome. All right, further discussion, we're ready to vote. All right, there's a motion on the table to approve the funding of the water plant project for, and I have my agenda up here because it's been so long since we discussed it, $110,000 and X amount of dollars.
548.
548. So, all in favor of approving the contract to JBS for that amount, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Motion does carry, and we move on to item C. This is going to be a discussion action item to deny the request to waive quarterly water and sewer penalties for the crossings on Broadway.
There's a memo in your packet on page 154 of your agenda packet. The account holder sent in a letter, it's in your packet. They're requesting that the board give some reconsideration to an administrative denial of their request to waive approximately a little over $3,000 in fees. That came to the administration, I want to say in mid-August or so. We denied it. The board has an opportunity tonight to reconsider that. The letter's in your packet. I think there's enough information in your packet for you to give due consideration to the item.
All right. We have a motion on this item.
I'd make a motion to deny the request to waive quarterly water and sewer bill penalties for the crossing on Broadway in the amount of $3,038.89 on account number 02342.
I'll support that.
Okay, we do have a motion and support. Discussion?
I guess my rationale behind that is there's a due date, meaning that's the final date to pay your bill before penalties or interest may kick in. Bills go out substantially before that. Oftentimes, it's just a mindset of people, my bill's due on this date. Well, your bill's payable for a period of time before that, and yes, at a point in time it becomes delinquent. And as we've had requests like this before us numerous times, and we have been consistent in our stance to be fair to the citizens who, through their timely payment, you know, are supporting and appropriating the funds for the township to continue proper operations, service, maintenance of both the water and wastewater, that we must deny this request.
I know in the past we've talked about I mean, they're an $80,000 a year customer. I know in the past we've talked, maybe we should maybe talk about reducing some of these penalties, like the percentage. So maybe in the future, if we, might want to think about that. But I support the denial.
Bill, that's a point that's before us, we have our budget
Yeah,
that we'll be working on, and there's a fee structure and
Yes.
and those sorts of housekeeping items can be discussed.
Yeah, I knew we were going to be talking.
Yeah, I too will support your motion. You hit it on the head. It's if you're going to have a policy, it has to be something that's fair and equal to all and maintained equally and fair for all. But we did mention, and I'd like in maybe in a future discussion when we talk about fees, is maybe are there extenuating circumstances? If a person had been hospitalized, there was a recent death in the family. I mean, I know that, that can get sticky too, but it might be something we want to look at, that how do we maintain a fair and consistent and equal policy that might also be more humane when it comes to looking at extenuating circumstances. But I will support your motion, Tim.
I was either side of this issue until I saw the history report and saw that there was multiple times
Yes.
that occurred.
Yes.
So I understand the fact that they had an issue with maybe an employee of some type that missed something or was negligent in looking at it. So I was willing to give them some leeway until I saw that, and then after that, I agree. I would also deny the request. Further discussion? All right, so we take this up to vote, and this would be to deny the request to waive quarterly and water sewer bill penalties for the crossings on Broadway in the amount of $3,038.89. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries. And we move on to item D, which is going to be a budget recommendation discussion.
Thank you. And what I wanted to do tonight was just I guess provide an overview of the budget recommendation. I won't take a lot of time doing it, but the FY 2019 budget, Township Manager is by rule supposed to present a recommendation to the board. That's before you tonight, if you will. The electronic copy was sent out a week or so ago. You received the bound copy in your mailboxes around the same time. There are, if my count's right, 8 funds that the board will have to act on this year: the general fund, the fire fund, the special assessment fund, the EDA operating fund, the West EDA operating fund, 2% grant fund, and the sewer fund, and then the water fund. The budget recommendation that's in front of you tonight is a result of budget requests received by the respective work units or departments. Information that I have obtained from discussions with the board, maybe not directly related to the budget, but through my observations and discussions with the board over the last year. And then having had conversations with the various work units, developed what is in front of you, my recommended budget. The format is similar to last year. I encourage you to look at the charts that are in the other information section of the document. You'll find historical data there. You'll find a proposed fee schedule there, data on the personnel costs that the organization incurs. And then new this year, you'll also see some long-term projections as it relates to the general and the general fund and the fire fund. And moving forward, we're going to be adding funds to those projections, but we were able to get the general fund and fire fund in there. Those long-term projections are 10-year projections, and they're based on current operations, just moving forward. As it relates to the general fund, the 1 mil tax levy is the same as the prior year. The total appropriation is $2.245 million. There's funding to provide administrative support to the Sidewalk and Pathways Prioritization Committee. There's funding for the replacement of 7 desktop computers and 3 tablets due to age and outdated specifications. Our contracted IT department is inventoried all our equipment, and we're instituting a rotation schedule to replace these before they die when it's a bad time for them to die. There's a Parks and Recreation Master Plan update at $15,000. That's been in the budget the last, at least in 2018, that we have not been able to get to. We are committing to get to that in 2019 because we think it'll free up opportunities for other funding. Continuing our replacement and adding to the barrier-free picnic tables at our parks. There is park funding maintenance in the amount of $40,000, give or take, to provide to complete the McDonald Park seal coating project, the asphalt repair, installation of some cement bunks, if you will, to hold some of the gravel and the dirt that the baseball fields use and that we use as well for maintenance, the gravel, sand. Related to that, there has been a grant, 2% grant application that was submitted. So if we were to receive that, some of this funding would be freed up for other things, but in the event we don't receive the funding, it's part of this recommended budget. Gravel road improvements, 4 miles again in the amount of $48,000. There is funding for $268,000 in support of the Isabella Road intersection safety program or project that will be initiated next year, 2019, as well as $167,000 in support of the contract that was approved earlier, or the participation agreement, I'll call it, with the County Road Commission for the Lincoln Road, Broomfield to the Bridge project. $100,000 for sidewalk and pathway work, depending on what may come out of the Sidewalk Pathways Prioritization Committee, and in support of the interlocal pathway connector that, as you know, was also made part of a 2% application earlier this year. There's funding in the recommended budget to support potential joint operations and management of the Mount Pleasant Regional Airport that was mentioned a couple weeks ago, and is something that the communities are working on. The general fund budget concludes with a projected fund balance of $3.4 million, which is 152% of the recommended budget expenses. As it relates to the fire fund, the millage would remain at this year's current millage of 2 mills. That, of course, is dependent on voter approval of the millage renewal that's on the ballot for this November, which you all approved the ballot language for that some time ago. Total fire fund budget is $1.29 million. That includes funding for a fire truck that was originally thought that would be purchased this year. It now looks like 2019. The truck, the requisite equipment, and a contingency on that, there's $478,000 budgeted for that pumper truck. There's also $45,000 budgeted to pay for the annual, to pay a part of the annual hydrant flushing program. And that's new this year. In the past, the hydrant flushing expenses have been incurred solely by the water fund, but we are actually flushing out hydrants that are benefiting the fire suppression effort. The activity does also benefit the wider water system, but thought it appropriate that the fire fund ought to be bearing some of these costs. So there's $45,000 budgeted there. The 2019 year-end fund balance for the fire fund is $644,000, or 79% of the operating expenses. And again, you can look at some not terribly sophisticated, but they are enlightening long-term projections for the general fund and the fire fund that are in your book as well. The EDA operating budget, total appropriation of $441,000. Projects that were approved in 2018. To the extent that they're not completed in 18, the funding exists in 19 for the portion that would be carried over. There is $50,000 for budgeted miscellaneous projects that have not yet been identified. The traditional programs of snow removal, maintenance around the sidewalk, the lawn mowing, holiday lighting, banners, flowers, all that is budgeted again this year. There's the traditional transfer from the EDA fund to the fire fund because the fire safety program benefits the EDA district. That transfers in the amount of $64,000. There's a projected year-end fund balance of $991,000 in the EDA operating fund at the end of this projected next fiscal year. I will note that the EDA approved this budget along with a recommendation to approve it to the Board of Trustees at their September, I believe it was their September EDA meeting. The W West EDA operating fund, that total appropriation recommendation is $616,000. Property tax capture in this fund is down significantly from prior years, and that's a result of no longer being able to capture school taxes, which we had been capturing to help pay off make debt service payments. The last debt service payment was made earlier this year, so with that debt obligation retired, we're no longer able to capture the school taxes, so that'll flow back to the school district. The Lincoln Road improvement project south of the bridge, they're a funding partner, and that is budgeted, as well as some funding for an overlay on Lincoln Road from Remus to Pickard. We put in $170,000 in this recommended budget. I can tell you right now that's low. We received an update on that a little while ago. It's over $200,000, maybe closer to $240 if memory serves. But nonetheless, we do have some money budgeted in this recommendation for that. Also funding in the West EDA in support of trying to get that sidewalk in from Lincoln Road, or along Lincoln Road from the Lux property up to Township Hall that we weren't able to get done this year. Again, the West EDA also makes a contribution to the fire fund in support of the fire public safety program. Projected year-end fund balance in the West EDA fund is $516,000. And to come yet in the West EDA, the big project will be Lincoln Road from the bridge north up to M20. Not sure when that might be started. They're still looking for funding on that, so that my guess is it's still a couple years out. The sewer fund budget, total budget $3.594 million. There is no sewer service rate charge change recommended pending the results of a rate study that we're going to have done, what maybe is better call it a cost of service study that we're going to have done for the water and the sewer operation. There is a slight increase being recommended in the hookup fee of $25. Capital maintenance projects that are in this recommended budget include the continuing of the sanitary sewer cleaning and televising, which was spoke to a bit earlier tonight, manhole mainline repairs to keep the system in good working order, $70,000 for bypass manhole rehabilitation work at lift station 7. Those are what I refer to as capital maintenance projects. New capital projects, we have slated $215,000 for pump station number 1 repair and rehabilitation. That is a project that also is being supported by the East DDA in terms of a funding partner. We do have money in this year's budget for the installation of a 3rd screw pump out at the plant. There's 2 right now. That has been kind of on the horizon for a while to get a 3rd screw in there. One goes down on occasion for maintenance or other unexpected reasons. We're left with 1, so there's a bit of a risk there from that perspective. 2019 projected year-end net assets in this fund are $12.23 million. On the water fund, the total appropriation is $1.6 million. There's no water service rate change recommended for the water system, for the same reason as was mentioned for the sewer. Again, there's a slight increase in the water hookup rate of $25 and a water benefit fee increase of $25 as part of this recommendation. We do see an increase in water tower lease revenue. We've been negotiating a new contract with AT&T on the tower that they lease that's located on top of one of our water towers. We hope to have that lease in front of you in the next couple meetings, but that looks to increase revenue into the fund of just under under $52,000. The again, I'll reiterate that the water fund has seen a savings under this recommended budget of $45,000 compared to prior years, as some of that flushing expense is now being recommended to be borne by the fire fund. Capital projects include the replacement of some ground radar locating equipment, the continuation of the fire hydrant installation program along Pickard between Lincoln and Meridian. We've been adding a few hydrants to there each year. The 2019 projected year-end net assets in this fund is $10.1 million, and the net assets also includes the value of the infrastructure itself. That's not just free cash that's sitting there. Regarding fees, the fee schedule that's recommended is part of your budget packet. That's in the other information tab. Fees, there's 2 areas of fees that are being recommended for an increase that are not related to the water and sewer operation, which I mentioned already. McDonald Park and Jameson Park pavilion rental fees. There's a recommendation to increase those from what is currently $40 a day to $60 a day for residents, and from $60 a day to $84 a day for non-residents. And then the rental rate for Jameson Hall is recommended to increase from $100 to $125 for residents, and from $150 to $175 for non-residents. Regarding next steps, The formal next steps will be a item in front of the board at the November 28th meeting, whereby you'll be setting the date for the public hearing. In terms of the calendar, the public hearing is anticipated to be held December 12th. The public hearing notice would be in the paper December 2nd, and budget adoption by the board at your December 19th meeting. I would imagine, as we did last year, and I mean, I would recommend, it's up to the board how you want to proceed, but I would recommend a study session be held devoted to nothing but the budget, maybe a Saturday or a night during the week, but a couple hours where we can just talk about the budget. And in that area, if that's the direction you want to go, alternatively, we could take regularly scheduled board meetings and devote those to budgets. They would include a normal budget, or another normal board of trustee meeting would include normal business. To the extent we cannot delay it, it needs to be on the agenda. That's why special meetings often work well for this. If that's the way the board would want to proceed, you can anticipate a doodle poll to try to figure out a day and time that works. And that is my presentation on the budget rollout. Happy to answer any questions you may have or receive any feedback on how you'd like to move forward. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
So we'll have to do something between November 28th and December 19th.
The budget by rule needs to be adopted before the end of the fiscal year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the 19th, is our last meeting.
That's your last meeting of December. You can always schedule special meetings, you know, if you need more time.
Sounds good from what I heard.
Yep.
Put a doodle poll out.
Yeah, that works good.
Yeah.
Would the
Yeah.
board prefer a Saturday morning or a
I-
evening or?
This board would prefer an evening.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, an evening would,
Then that's how, then we'll limit the poll to nights. Thank you.
Maybe even before a
Early
meeting,
evening?
you know, maybe if we had some, I don't know how many hours we're going to devote to it, but maybe like at 4 o'clock on a Wednesday before our meeting. I don't know if people would be too exhausted doing
Or
that.
just
but,
stick it out Thursday, maybe.
you know, and then you just consolidate it all, but
Yeah,
just
All right, well, we'll throw out
Yeah,
a couple,
doesn't
several
things.
blocks of time, probably 3 hours in length. May not need them all. Some will start at 4, some will start at 5, but there'll be a variety of choices to choose from.
sounds
and that'll
good.
be for dates coming up in October and November.
It'll
Correct.
be primarily October.
Thank you.
I hope to have the first, I mean, I think we need to have,
Mhm.
you need to have a study session in October. So that will frame the,
Thank you.
I also
dates.
like the synopsis. I like that 4 or 5 pages in the beginning of the
Yeah.
budget each year. You know, that gives you a nice overview. Then you can start looking into the specifics as you go to each category. But very nice job. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so we got one last item on new business, and that is going to be item E, which is added at the beginning. This is going to be approval of a land division for parcel 37-140-020-20-011-00, and the parcel is located on Remus Road, Mount Pleasant, and is owned by Union Farms LLC.
thank you. This material was put at your dais tonight. This is an add-on. We have a land division from the proper owner is Union Farms LLC. The primary owner is Mr. McDonald, sole proprietor, has a parcel of land, filed a land division to split that into 2 parcels. There would be 1 parcel zoned R1, rural residential, and the rest of the parent parcel, if you will, would retain the current split zoned status of R1 and B5. The reason for this request is to facilitate a land sale that the property owner would like to engage in. The item has been reviewed internally by the planner's office, the assessor's office, the township clerk. They all recommend approval. The application comports with the Union Township ordinance governing land divisions as well as the State Land Division Act, and we recommend approval of this split.
I'll make a motion to approve the land division split of 37-14-020-20-011-00.
Okay, you have a second?
I'll second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Further discussion?
Yeah, where is this located
Yeah.
on Remus Road? Seeing we didn't really
Kind
have
of like
time to-
across from the Oaks,
Cross.
where the Oaks
Yep.
subdivision is.
Okay.
So, how much acreage is it that, this new parcel, do you know that, how much acreage the new parcel is going to be?
Pat, would you like to come up and speak to acreage
Yeah.
detail, please?
Good evening.
Good evening.
Yes, Mr. McDonald is splitting 140 acres. He's retaining 60 acres, which is the B5 and R1, and that's gonna remain agricultural. He is selling 80 acres to Edward Peters, and that's wooded and kind of swampy down by the river, so,
Okay. So the B5 would be
along the road.
along the road, along Remus, and then this would be, there's some houses there, and then there's the woods in the back, is that,
Right, there aren't any houses on it, it's all vacant.
it's all vacant?
Yep.
So explain to me again, now where's it, so from the Oaks, is it on the same side as the Oaks or the opposite?
No, it's not,
South-
across the
south
road.
side? Okay, but there's some vacant, aren't there some vacant houses there?
There are, and those belong to Mr. Peters. I think there's, his office is one, and then there's 2 vacant houses.
Okay, and that's gonna be retained,
Those are separate parcels.
okay.
Those are separate
Okay,
parcels.
and then where is the 80 that's being split off? That's to the south? Or, again, not having seen this makes it a little bit difficult.
It's to the
as a-
south.
As an add-on, you know?
It's to the south.
It's,
Okay.
yeah,
It's to the south of parcel A.
he has 200 and some feet on Remus Road.
Okay,
So this would be contiguous to property that Mr. Peters currently owns?
Yes, it is.
So there is no problem with access for,
No, he has 200 and some feet to go back into the property.
you say it's wooded property? Or,
There's 20 acres, 25 acres that are not woods. The rest of it is woods and hunting ground, basically.
do you know what the, northern dimension and footage would be? You said, wow, did you say, Pat, 80 acres?
There's 80 acres.
Okay, never mind on that question.
yeah, you'd have a square,
It's not a square.
or a rectangle, right?
The 60 is.
Okay,
You see that on the back page. It's on the back page of our, or the,
Right, there's a,
it's a map there that she shows.
want me to show you, Jim?
Yeah.
Bring it up.
Parcel A is along M20.
Parcel A is what Mr. McDonald is,
that's what he's keeping, right? Parcel A, Bill?
this is
What's
Remus.
that?
Parcel A
This
is what
is
he's keeping.
Mark
McDonald's
is keeping
says
parcel
Sixty
A, yeah.
acres, and
And
that
this
continues to
whole
be
portion
B5.
with the
Yeah.
frontage
And so then
to
parcel
Remus
B,
is what it is.
that goes all the way back.
He
huh?
wants his hunting ground back.
Yeah, it goes back to the river.
Oh, I gotcha, yep, I see it. And then with the right of way coming in, well,
regardless of its shape or size, the request has been filled out correctly and it's in complete accordance with all laws. So we really don't have any bearing to reject based on its shape or even location. It's time to get the rubber stamp out and move on.
All right, so let's, if discussion's over, I'm assuming it is at this point, then we can probably take this to vote. This is going to be to approve of land division for parcel 37-14-020-20-011-00, and the parcel is located on Remus Road, Mount Pleasant, and is owned by Union Farms LLC. All in favor of this approval or this?
Just one more question I
Yes.
have, just for understanding it. It's a land division, but it's also a zoning change?
No.
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 Okay.
Okay, so this would be to approve of the land division. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, division is approved. That's our last new business item. And then we move on to item 11, which is extended public comment. This is 5 minutes regarding any issue.
This is, yeah.
Oh, Mr. Richards, we're going to come right up here to the,
I gotta sit here?
yep.
Yep.
It's a comfier chair.
I live in the Oak subdivision, and I'm representing the neighbors in the subdivision, many of whom have small children that can't be here, kids that are in school that can't be here, and another party that's fighting their way to get to Florida right now in the middle of the hurricane. So we have the Longs and the Richards. And the issue is regarding McGurk's sign, his new big billboard sign. Have you all driven by it? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. Obviously, it's a totally obnoxious sign. When we're in our houses, the lights are off. Even when the lights are not off, it looks like lightning in the district, or in the distance. So I'm asking you, how is the property zoned? What's the zoning on that property, do you know, McGurk's?
B5.
It's a B5.
Yeah, B5.
What's that? Like, does that mean commercial,
It's business.
industrial, or
It's a, B5 would be business, and there's certain things that are allowed within that business.
okay, do you know the square footage of the sign? Or the dimensions of the sign? How high it is, how?
Got to be careful about turning this into a question and
Okay.
answer.
Okay.
But,
Because I'm.
Well, Mark can probably,
It's still
It's comment.
oh, I'm sorry.
public comment time.
yeah.
Okay, so then I'm looking at, I'm wondering, I'm looking for some help if we can get the sign lowered to a manageable amount of light or lumens. I don't know, is there any lumen rule in the township? What are the restrictions of a sign on that property? I was under the assumption that only light or general industrial districts can put up a billboard, unless this is not considered a billboard and you have a different definition of it. So I'm trying to figure out, how could this sign have been put on this property this big, this bright, this obtrusive? Maybe I'm at the wrong, maybe I'm with the wrong group. Is there another group that determines
yeah.
what signs can go?
We just
and
have to
what
be
can't?
careful about the public comment as a comment from you to us, and then it's the back and forth we can't have. Okay, and then he,
So
our manager says he'll address some of these in
Okay,
initial
perfect.
comments.
I'll
So-
do that during manager comments.
After you talk,
Ted,
Mhm.
then the
After I
manager,
talk,
the
okay.
manager speaks.
Okay, so we're looking for some help. When our neighborhood is now lit up, it goes down, it lights up, it goes off, with the change of all the signs. I have called the sign company, and they've said they've turned the sign down. I'm not so sure about that, because when I was on the phone with them, they said, well, we did this and we did that, and I said, no, you didn't. I just drove by the sign and you didn't change what you're telling me right now, so I don't know how valid their comments are. So I just can't believe that this sign is there, and I just don't understand how this sign could be erected and operating like it is. We have to have some kind of a sign ordinance size and some kind of lumen restriction. If not, I sure would like to see you maybe contemplate getting one in act, so.
Please take the time to drive out to our neighborhood at night, seriously. It's crazy.
Okay, so if I'm getting no response,
We
okay.
can't respond.
Okay,
The manager will.
Yeah.
okay.
The next item on the agenda after the public's done is manager comments, and I will address a couple of your concerns at that time. How's that?
Sounds good.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Black.
Keep my comments brief. I've been here a couple of times already, so you guys know me. Just lucky to get through the primary. There were 5 initially, now there's just 2 of us going into the general election. A couple of things I just wanted to highlight. This is going to be a pretty historic election when it comes to the probate judge position or any judicial position in Isabella County, because we're either going to have our first female judge or we're either going to have our first African American judge. Either way, it's going to be a win-win situation for the community, and I think that's a good thing. But at the end of the day, I also think it's important that we have our most qualified person as our judge, because the probate judge is the judge who protects our children and our most vulnerable, and that's the most important thing. A couple of things that I want to highlight is that being the senior assistant prosecutor and lead prosecutor in abuse and neglect cases, I'm in court every day, and I'm in court protecting children every day. Last time I was here, I think I talked about a case where I dealt with a 2-year-old kid with bruises and injuries. That was just one of the cases I deal with. In the last couple of weeks, I've had another case I just want to highlight, just to show you these aren't aberrations or a case that just happened once in a while. These are cases I see regularly. I had a couple that were together. The woman was pregnant. They moved in with her mother's drug dealer, and this happened in Florida. They were there for about 30 days, and after about 30 days, she shot him in the back of the head, killed him. They fled, left to Michigan, got caught, and were sent to prison back in Florida. She actually had the baby while she was in prison. The baby was given to her mother, so the grandmother. This was the grandmother whose drug dealer they were living with. So she was not an appropriate person to have this baby, but somehow that fell through the cracks. Grandmother and her boyfriend moved back up to Michigan, and for 2 years this child was in their care. Child wasn't necessarily abused physically, but the home was not appropriate. It finally caught up to them. DHS got involved. I was the individual who they called to set the petition to have the child removed from the home, and the child, I'm happy to say, is now in a foster home and doing well. So these are the types of cases that I deal with on a daily basis, and these are the types of the experiences I have that make me, I guess, qualified to make the right decisions, because removing a child from a home is extremely traumatic, but keeping a child in a neglectful home is extremely traumatic. So you have to make the right decisions. The other thing I just want to highlight is the mental health court that I've been talking about. When I first came here, I was talking about the mental health court. The second time I came here, I was talking about the mental health court. And the third time I'm here, I'm still talking about the mental health court. I think a lot of the candidates from early on realized that we do have an issue with mental health in the criminal justice system. It's a revolving door, and that's a problem. One thing that I do think, though, that really distinguishes me from everybody else is I've been acting on this from a year ago and not just talking about it. A year ago, I reached out to community mental health, and we started a work group. So we've been meeting about once or twice a month, and we're actually working on the logistics of a mental health court. In that group is community mental health. We have local law enforcement, which consists of Sheriff Maine, Chief Sawyer, Lieutenant Klaus from CMU. We have psychologists, psychiatrists, we have DHS, we have substance abuse providers, and we're actually working on logistics of bringing a mental health court to Isabella County. So again, not just talking about it, not just empty campaign promises, but actually action. So really these are the main points of my campaign. November 6th is the election. There were only 3 votes that separated myself and the other candidate who's gone through, so it was a really close election. I think there will be some differences now because there were 5 initially, so a lot of votes are going to separate. I don't expect it to be as close, but every vote matters. So hopefully you guys like what you hear from me. Hopefully you guys will consider supporting me. And also hopefully you'll spread the word with family and friends. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you.
All right, public comment is still open. Do we have anybody else that would like to come forward? Seeing none, we close public comment and we go to item 12, which is manager's comments.
Thank you. I do have a couple items. I'll start with Mr. Richards was up here a few minutes ago. The administration is acutely aware of the sign. We've received complaints regarding that. The couple things, the development and specifically the sign has gone through the approval processes so that it is allowed to exist. I think that was one of your questions, the billboard. And this township does have a sign ordinance. It also has a lighting ordinance. And it is our judgment right now that the lighting that's coming out of that sign does not meet the ordinance. The size, I'm pretty certain it does. I personally have been in contact with the property owner and the sign company. So we are addressing that issue. Our expectation is that the sign will comport with the lighting ordinance.
People literally aren't sleeping.
I didn't catch that.
Oh, do you have an estimation on when things will be done? When things will be changed?
I don't have a date certain, but I mean, I've been working on the issue as recently as this week. I don't have the ability to go out there and pull a plug.
We would just like to see it dimmed.
As would we.
Okay.
And so.
It's a really disappointing development, really, for people at Green Acres.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So, with that being said, the couple of the other couple other comments that I have. We're looking at putting in some lighting on the south parking lot. Speaking of lighting, we have more people parking up there at the south lot than we have in the past. And for citizen and employee safety, we're looking to have some lighting put out there. It would meet the lighting ordinance. It would be downshielded. The project, if we move forward with it, is likely to be a little over $3,000. I'm not sure that requires, I'd have to look whether or not it needs to come back to the board or not. But I do think for the safety of our employees and the public that we do need some more lighting out there. The current lighting that exists on this part of the parking lot, we can't utilize that pole for any of this stuff going south. So just want to let you know we're working on that. If there's any big objections, you can let me know. The PFAS testing that I've spoken about in the past is scheduled for October 18th. And there was a press release issued today joint press release by the city, the township, and the tribe to provide some information to the public in anticipation of that testing being done and the results that are likely to come out in mid-November. So there'll be more to come on that. We did engage in some mediation last week on the Lux matter. That not sure we made a lot of progress. I think we made some. The mediation is still open, so we're still continuing that discussion. The semi-annual hydrant flushing program will be going on between October 15th and November 13th. There's a map on the website in Township Hall as to where that'll be going on around the township, which weeks. Reminder of the fire millage that is on the ballot in November. Everybody should get out and vote one way or the other. And then at the last meeting, I mentioned that I was thinking about bringing in a podium to replace the table and chair. I didn't hear any real big objections to that. I haven't heard any since then. So I'm continuing, I'm gonna move forward with that. So you'll see that change in there at some point. And then also just let you know that received a letter of resignation effective 12/31 for the assistant assessor's position. So the administration will begin reviewing that job description for current relevancy, review how the position best fits in with the finance department, and then we'll go from there. There was mention, I was going to mention the manager's contract, but that was brought up earlier tonight. So thank you, that's all I have.
Okay, all right. Okay, so that brings us into our next to last item, which is final board comments. We'll start with Tim.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody. The hour's getting late. I think we kind of breached the topic of efficiency and effectiveness. And I have reflected many times after our meetings how much less time could have been spent during our meeting, and hope we can continue to become the board that can get things done more efficiently and effectively.
Phil?
I don't have any additional comments.
Bill?
My comment, I can wait on mine until we have our budget deal. When we have our budget session, I can wait on mine until then.
Norm?
I think that tonight the board has had an opportunity to clear the air. I think now we should all take a deep diaphragmatic breath, take a step back, push the reset button, and let's move forward. Let's move forward and go to what we're here for, and that is to do projects to improve the lives and the lifestyle of people in our community. So I think at this point, hopefully now we've gotten through some of the kinks and we can just move forward from here.
Lisa? All right. Thank you, Norm. Sometimes you have to hit a point before you can move to the next level, right? So, all right. So, guess what? Motion to adjourn. Who's going to make it?
Me.
All right. And we have a second, obviously, somewhere. You all want to go home, right?
Somebody's got a second.
I don't know, maybe we should hang out a little bit here.
Stuart, you want to make the motion? Your second? Okay. All in favor say aye. Aye. Adjourn.
Really, somebody has to make the motion though, for real.
I'll second it.